Chapter 41. Recovery. This is it. This is where I die. Part of him wanted to close his eyes, pretend it wasn't about to happen. The other part of him desired to live, to keep fighting, to resist until the very end. Living one out, pushing his one functional leg out, he dug his heel into the ground and pushed himself back. Dread filled him as the bear's head grew larger in his vision as it came closer. He swung his sword side to side, hoping to deter the beast. But it had passed that stage. The bear wouldn't give him up for anything now. Kai realized how much trouble Hector must have had fighting the beast. Fire seemed to hurt it, but not to the point where it impeded the bear. Kai could only assume it had an innate fire resistance and a hardy body to back it up. Akane had done her best, but she was too weak and ineffective against the beast. Unable to stand, he shifted around to kneel, putting all the weight on his one good leg. Kai kept the sword close to his body. The beast nearly loomed him. Its eye was still trained on him. From his left, flames lit up the forest once more as a stream of fire smashed into the side of the bear's face. Kai could feel the heat. Even though it didn't touch him, he was uncomfortable. Growling, the bear turned its head towards the fire. At that moment, Kai knew it was his only chance. Pushing off his one leg, Kai shot next to the bear's face. His sword low, he thrust up, heavy blow assisting as it pierced into the bear's neck. He felt almost no resistance as it tore through. Only a small rasp could be heard before shifted and then collapsed. A ding told Kai what he already knew. The fire died out a moment later. Akane and Kai shared a look for a moment in the light of the burning forest before the fox lightly smiled and then collapsed. "Akane," Kai yelled. He hopped across to the fox with his one good leg. Even movement caused him agony. Kneeling next to her, he couldn't tell if Akane was injured. The outside of her body lacked any injuries, but she had gotten batted aside, so it's possible the injuries were internal. "Akane, Akane," Kai shook the fox gently. In usual fashion, the only response he received was her stomach growling loudly. Relieved, Kai smiled. He knew she would be okay now. Liquid dripped down his face. Wondering if maybe he was bleeding somewhere on his face, he patted it. But no blood came from his fingers. Tears? Was he crying because he had lived, or because Akane was going to be safe? Either way, Kai felt relief. The absurd battle had been close. He knew in his current state he would have never beaten the bear without Akane. Cracking open his last weak health potion, he downed it quickly. Although it wouldn't do anything for his broken bones, it would at least heal the puncture wounds from the bear in his leg. Health, 243, 1050. Stamina, 89,400. Mana, 73,800. You have slain Spiked Earth Bear, Forging level 41. Vanguard has reached Foundation level 80. Vanguard has reached Foundation level 90. Gravity Pillar has advanced to 210. Burden has advanced to 210. He was ragged. Another fight and he would die with certainty. Lucky for him, he saw the forest's edge. Grabbing a stick, he propped himself up and left with Akane curled around his neck. He'd wait to put his new stats in, unless he came across another monster. Free of the dreadful forest, Kai limped his way across the grass. Around his neck, Akane slept, still unconscious from the fight. He wasn't a healer, so he just hoped she had passed out from hunger or some nonsense, and not internal wounds he couldn't see. His left arm hung limply at his side. Every step, every jolt caused him agony as pain traveled across it. Head hanging down, he took shallow breaths. While he wasn't in immediate danger of dying, he was hurting. The minor health potion hadn't done much for him. He barely had the energy to lift his head to see where he was walking as he trudged onwards. All he could think about was how he shouldn't have won that fight. If Hector hadn't injured that beast, then he might have lost and died. And without Akane, he certainly would have died. He shuffled along the grass, nearly tripping a few times when his foot got caught on a rock or loose dirt. Both his body and mind were dead tired. The entire day had been a blur of excitement. He had done it all. Running, sneaking, fighting. All he wanted to do now was rest. The first sun had long set, and because of the way the other sun rotated, it would be hidden behind Titan Prime for a few more weeks yet. His eyes were half closed. He walked on automatic without thinking or looking. He didn't know if it had been minutes or hours since he started walking. The only thing that registered in his head was when he took a step and instead of grass or dirt, he had stepped onto smooth stone. Straining his neck, he saw the glorious sight of a road. Unfortunately, no one was in sight. To his left, the road continued on out of sight, with trees on each side. To his right, he saw the same, but behind the trees was the silhouette of mountains, visible even in the darkness. The capital was very close to where the Ashbourne Mountains began. He began his trek down the road towards the mountains, silently praying to the Nine that he was going the right way. His eyes kept drooping as he walked. The only thing keeping him awake was the pain from his broken limbs that surged with every step. After an undetermined amount of time, he heard sounds coming from behind him. Someone yelled, "Stop the carriage," but that was all he heard as his eyes closed with a small smile on his face. The first thing he noticed was light shining into his eyes. He stretched his arms like he always did after waking up, but when no pain came to him, he blinked his blurry vision clear. Looking around, he had no idea where he was. He was laying in an unfamiliar bed with cream-colored sheets. His armor had been removed and he was wearing a cotton short-sleeved shirt. Looking outside the window where the primary light source was, he saw the same enchanted lights in the sky, alerting him that he was back in the capital. Below on the windowsill was his armor, laid out across every piece accounted for. The pristine, dull white was now dirty, as if he had been rolling around on the ground and tossed in mud. His sheathed sword was leaning against the wall nearby. Encircling his bed, a white curtain was drawn around it, giving him privacy. Akane slept on her back with her tongue hanging out of her mouth. A bit of drool leaked off the tongue onto the bed. Kai breathed a sigh of relief. Tears welled up in his eyes. The trip through the forest had been the second worst day of his life, right after being betrayed and dying. Even though it had only been one short day, he thought he was going to die quite a few times. But thankfully, he had come out alive and stronger in the process. "Akane," Kai whispered. With a big yawn, the little fox's eyes popped open. She locked eyes with Kai, letting out a happy yap. Turning over, she jumped into Kai's arm before stretching up and licking his cheek. Her rough tongue tickled him. Moving her head away, Kai could see a string of saliva stretching from his cheek to her mouth. Yuck! He wiped away the wetness with his sleeve. "I'm glad you're all right," he said warmly to his companion. She barked back at him, Kai's interpretation of it being, "I'm glad you're okay too." Or that's what he would like to believe. She could have easily just been informing him she was hungry. Now that he gave it some thought, it was probably the more likely option. Kai's face changed to something more serious. "Akane, that was stupid and brave. You almost died. We both almost died," he said that last part softly. Recalling the events of what he assumed was last night, he realized he had been lucky. The general rule of thumb was not to fight monsters or sentient beings that were an entire realm above you without assistance. Of course, there were exceptions to this guideline, but last night wasn't one of them. What had been most strange was that Akane had found him. She had found him in the middle of a dark forest, many kilometers outside the capital where he had left her. Just how did she find him? How did she get to the forest? There were layers of intrigue and mystery revolving around Akane, including the fact that she possessed an uncanny intelligence that wasn't often found in lower realm monsters. Still holding Akane in his hands, he examined her, trying to see anything out of the ordinary. But the only thing out of the ordinary was the eye roll she gave him. Seeing her reaction, Kai sighed. The only one with the answers he sought was probably his grandfather Roy, the chief of Kitsune village, but it wasn't as if he could go home until the end of the academic year. Maybe I am overthinking it, he thought as he watched Akane begin grooming one of her front legs. He swore she kept peeking back up at him ever so subtly, or maybe it was a play of the lights on her eyes. Whatever her uniqueness, she was family. Kai would trust her because she also had risked her life to save him. The only thing likely to come between them was food. On second thought, she might betray me if someone offered her a buffet, he jokingly thought. The curtain was drawn back, revealing a robed man with the signature health symbol on his chest. Oddly, he wore eyeglasses, something Kai had not seen since he had died. "Good, you're both awake," the man spoke with a clear and pleasant tone. He approached, quickly grabbing Kai's wrist. Placing 2 fingers against the underside of Kai's wrist, the man smiled. Good. Good. Back to full health. The swelling to your head has vanished too. Excuse me, sir, what happened? If you're asking what happened to you being brought here, then I have no clue. I was assigned to you as my patient upon your arrival. You had significant trauma to the head, arm, body, and leg. Took 3 sessions to fully heal you. The next step, yes? He turned to someone beyond Kai's vision. There was a little bit of whispering. Kai couldn't pick it up. The healer nodded once before turning back to Kai. I have another patient that is in critical condition. Someone will be here to debrief you. Stay out of trouble. Before Kai could get a word in, the man had vanished from sight. Kai and Akane shared a look. I guess we are waiting, he shrugged. On cue, Akane's stomach growled loudly. Hopefully not too long, he added. During the wait, Kai checked his status. Unspent attributes. Stats available, 50. He placed his stats, giving more attention to dexterity and endurance. If possible, I should try and save my stats going forwards, until I see what I gain when I enter the forging realm. Perhaps the new skills and abilities will give me more insight for my build. Vitality, 110, 115. Strength, 110. Dexterity, 60. Endurance, 50. Intelligence, 90. Wisdom, 90. About 10 minutes later, a woman peeked around the curtain. I was informed you were awake. She gave him a once-over and brought out a book and a writing instrument. I am Linda Farrer, from the Ashbourne Academy's Enforcement and Investigation Division. You are currently admitted to Ashbourne's First Mercy Hospital. The people who brought you to this building told us you were walking on the road next to the Delmash Forest. Would you please state your name for the record? Her tone was curt and demanding. Enforcement Division. Kai hadn't been at the academy too long, but he had heard rumors that whenever the Enforcement Division got involved with something, it was bad news. Kaismo Cineris, first year at the Ashbourne Academy, Kai stated. She jotted it down in her book. I've heard the details of what happened from others in your group, but I would like you to hear your explanation of everything that happened 2 days ago. What? Did you say 2 days ago? Yes, the expedition began 2 days ago, she repeated with a tone of annoyance. I've made regular visits, but you kept sleeping. Sorry, Kai said, annoyed himself. Not like I can control when I wake up after being beat to the edge of death. He started explaining the events that had transpired from beginning to end, including the goblin and possibility of more goblins nearby. The enforcement agent perked up when he mentioned the goblin. He didn't mention Akane's strange appearance, just noting to the agent that they had fought the smaller spiked earth bear and barely won. She closed her book with a resounding snap. It vanished out of sight a moment later. What you mentioned matches a lot of what was found. We will investigate why the bears were in the forest and not in their own territory in the mountains, she said. We did find the body of your groupmate Hector yesterday. His corpse was returned to his ward Franklin Cross. With you confirming your own identity, we now have an accounting of all of the persons lost or dead from the expedition. The forest purge can officially begin. Your hospital bill has been paid in full by the Academy. You are free to leave and return to the Academy at any time. Thank you. She began swiftly turning away as Kai called out, Wait, what is it? She sighed loudly, not even hiding her impatience. Purged? What do you mean purged? 13 students died, 5 of whom were from your own group, and 2 instructors, which again, 1 was your group's instructor. For such a catastrophe to occur, we must rectify the situation. Since they died inside the forest, all creatures inside will be purged. After all, many children belonging to the nobility died unnecessarily, their parents and families are up in arms, and we mustn't have those on the front lines becoming distracted after all. You need not worry about the other goblins in the forest. They will be found and slain in short order. Purged. Even those cute shadow foxes? Kai pulled Akane to his chest, hugging her tightly. While thinking, the lady had left without another word. It was only when Akane's stomach growled again that he knew it was time to leave the hospital for a cafeteria or restaurant before she started munching on a patient's toe, thinking it was a chicken tender or stealing a patient's food. Kai stood and walked over to his stuff. Everything was there, including the pouch of Hector's coin, surprisingly. His black underclothes were shredded, with no possible way of repair in his opinion. He started strapping his armor to his body, figuring it would be better than awkwardly carrying it, and left to return to the academy. Chapter 42. Closure. After getting their fill at a restaurant, Kai and Akane walked back to the academy. He felt a little scummy about using the coins from Hector's pouch to pay for food, but it wasn't quite dinner time yet, nor did he think Akane could wait. She was, after all, spoiled. His remaining coins had been left inside a lockbox, provided for all the students in his dorm building. Walking through the streets, Kai noticed damage to many of the buildings. The earthquake had been powerful enough to cause cracks in the sides of some of the stores and houses. It was a lucky thing that none of them had collapsed completely. It was a foreboding sign of things to come if the shaking kept ramping up in intensity and frequency. Kai hadn't heard of what was causing the earthquake. There was no way to tell when the quakes would stop or how much worse they would get. There was no fanfare when he walked through the academy's gate. The guards barely acknowledged his presence as he entered except for one who went wide-eyed. It was strangely quiet on campus. The last class of the day should have been over by now, so Kai expected to see the usual lively and noisy campus to which he was accustomed. Instead, it was quiet and gloomy. He did receive some odd looks from a couple of the students who were around. He decided to ignore them as he proceeded to his dorm. Upon entering his room, the first thing he heard was, "Kai." Andre ambushed him at the door, wrapping him tightly in a hug. "You're alive," he stated obviously. "I know I am," Kai answered sarcastically. He stood there awkwardly, his hands at his side as he was still embraced in the hug. Padding into the room, Akane gave him a roll of her eyes before she teleported onto the bed and began her much-needed nap. Especially after a big meal, he felt his body become free. Looking into Andre's eyes, he saw tiny tears falling. "You were reported missing. And Hector is gone," he added solemnly. Kai sighed frustratedly. "Yes, I know. I found his body." Andre looked like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Kai noticed that Hector's stuff had already been cleared from the room. All that remained was an empty mattress, devoid of all sheets, and a clear dresser. "Some people came in and cleared away his clothing and other items only 30 minutes ago," Andre said, noticing what Kai was staring at. It was a sad reminder that such a promising young man had lost his life in the chaos that existed in the Myriad of Worlds, and then could be treated as if he hadn't existed the next minute. Such was the way in the Myriad of Worlds, where death was a common thing. At least it used to be. Kai wasn't so sure about the present time. He was still getting his bearings on life outside his secret little village. "What happened to you?" Andre asked impatiently. "It's a long Frantic knocking at the door interrupted the two. Opening the door, Kai was once again ambushed. "You're alive," Nicholas yelled as he hugged him. "Why is everyone surprised?" he muttered. "I didn't know I was on a hugging basis with both Andre and Nicholas." Compared to the past, Kai felt he was more reserved around others. He wasn't opposed to making friends or getting along with others, but he tended to keep them at arm's length. He didn't know if he would ever become completely relaxed around others again. Being hugged by his only two friends at the academy had surprised him. Prince Nicola," Andre stuttered. "Nicky, please let go." He tried to project a pleading tone. He'd rather have the beautiful librarian hugging him, not two guys if he was being honest. Releasing him, Nicholas looked him up and down. "What in the gods happened? Level 90. Nicholas gasped. He rubbed his eyes and then pointedly stared at him again, likely using Identify once more to make sure it was correct. "What are you doing here, Nicholas? How did you know I was back?" "Oh," pink colored the white-haired man's cheeks. "A guard notified me when you walked through the gate. You had us worried." An awkward moment of silence passed until Nicholas nudged Andre in the side. "Ah, yay, worried," Andre finished. "Right," Kai drawled. "Did Sean make it back too?" "Yeah, he's fine. Not that we'd notice if he was missing or dead anyways. He literally only comes here to sleep." "I don't quite know where he is now," Andre supplied. True to his usual form, their fourth, or rather their third roommate now, was missing in action. Knowing what was coming, Kai proposed, "I'm guessing you both want to hear what happened." When he received two eager nods in response, he began telling the tale. He started from the beginning of the expedition to the end where he collapsed on the road. Both Nicholas and Andre told their side of the trip as well. Neither had suffered, but Nicholas's group did encounter another spiked earth bear. But unlike his instructor, Group 1's instructor soundly defeated the beast without any causalities. The bears varied in levels dramatically from what Nicholas explained. They ranged anywhere from the Forging realm to the Arbiter realm. "So what happens now?" Andre asked. "I guess we continue as normal," Kai answered despondently. In the early days of the humans in the Myriad of Worlds, many people died daily. Sadly, Kai was a bit desensitized to it. Life and progress couldn't stop for those who survived and moved on. Stagnation would have been the death of humanity if they stopped exploring, stopped expanding, and stopped fighting because they were scared. Outside the dorms, a bell rang 5 times, signaling an hour till dinner would begin. "What are your plans for the night?" Andre asked him. "There is someone I need to talk to." "And who is that?" Nicholas asked. "Franklin Cross." Nicholas's eyes lit up with understanding. "Would you like me to bring you to him?" "If you don't mind. I haven't been to the other dorm." Just as Nicholas and Kai were about to leave, he turned to Andre. "Before I forget, did you see Akane when you came back from your trip?" "Yay, she was here sleeping on your bed." Andre looked confused for a second before his eyes lit up. "Wait a minute, you said she was fighting with you that night." "The same night I returned and saw her on your bed." Under scrutiny from the 3 humans, Akane stood up and walked to the head of the bed before crawling underneath the covers, completely hiding her body from sight. She barked something and stopped moving. When she did nothing further, Kai just shook his head and proceeded outside of the dorm with Nicholas. "Kai, your fox is—" "Nicholas, it's best not to think about it. Akane is an enigma wrapped in a cute and cuddly exterior." Kai followed Nicholas to an adjacent building that was much larger than the male shared dorm building. Walking inside, the difference was like night and day compared to his dorm. Where his lobby area had been small and Spartan, the noble's lobby was lavish and large. Splendid couches, chairs, and tables occupied most of the large room. Beyond the furniture, there was a desk with an attendant behind it, with a guard to his right. Immediately inside were 2 guards who both bowed to the prince upon his entering. "Have to sign you in. Even a prince can't escape the rules." They walked over to the counter, where Nicholas began writing on a sheet placed on the desk. "Is Lord Cross in?" he asked the attendant. "He is. I'm not sure he is entertaining visitors at this time," the attendant said. "Perhaps I can take a message and deliver it to him later if it's not too urgent." While Nicholas was talking to the attendant, Kai was receiving odd looks from the guards and other students hanging out in the lobby. It had gone silent from the students the moment Kai and Nicholas had entered together. They were watching the two with a vested interest. Kai recognized some of them from his class, but hadn't spoken to any of them. "We can head over," Nicholas whispered. Even the hallway was decorated with paintings and the odd statue. After less than a minute of walking, Nicholas knocked on a door. A moment later, there was a hiss and a click, and the door swung open. Kai saw Franklin Cross's bloodshot eyes light up at the sight of the Nicholas. "Prince Nicholas," Lord Cross said, bowing as the guard had done. "No need for formalities. I am here on behalf of a friend." The future Duke nodded. "It's Kai, right? Please come inside, both of you." Human, forging level 9. They had been so far apart when Kai had first seen the noble, but now he had closed the gap significantly. Without actually fighting, there was no telling who would win if they fought as is, right now. The biggest problem was the difference between realms, which was significant. With extra attributes, skills, and enhancements via general skills, it would be difficult just to match the higher realm human. There were other factors too, such as class, element effectiveness, and personal skills as well. He would have to do some intelligence gathering as the end of the year came closer, so he could find out the classes and elements of his main opposition. Inside the room, Kai was blown away. He instantly regretted not splurging for the perks of a solo room. Not that he minded staying with his current roommates, but there is a certain freedom one experiences alone compared to when they are constantly surrounded. The room was decorated with beautiful wooden furniture and furnishings. A large bay window lit up the area. Through an open door, he saw a kitchen inside that looked half the size of his own room. Two closed doors, he could only assume were the bedroom and a private bathroom. Now I see why it was an extra 20 gold, private bathroom, security, and expensive-looking suite. The extra gold might have been worth it, to not have to hear Andre snore throughout the night. No magic could apparently solve that issue, or the communal toilets shared for the entire floor in his dorm. Franklin walked over to two couches with a table between them and motioned for Kai and Nicholas to be seated. Taking a seat across from the future Duke, Kai took a really good look at him. Dark circles hung under the tired, blue-eyed noble. His usually styled blonde hair was messy and unkempt, as if he hadn't bothered brushing it today. Kai felt for him. He had plenty of friends die over the years. There was no way to know how close Hector and Franklin were, but judging from his state of distress, they must have been very close. "What's this about?" Franklin croaked. Kai and Nicholas shared a look, the latter giving him a nod to go on. "I would like to begin by expressing my condolences for Hector. He was a reliable friend and a good companion." Franklin merely nodded, motioning for him to continue. "While trying to find my way out of the Delmash forest, I found Hector's body, and later, the monster who killed him." Franklin's eyes darkened. What killed him? His voice was full of promised vengeance, something Kai was very familiar with. "I believe it was a spiked earth bear." "Believe?" Franklin frowned. "I can only make an educated guess it was the bear." Hector had wounds consistent with being impaled and clawed, and part of the bear had burns across half its body when I encountered it. Not far from Hector, Kai surmised. I didn't find any other bodies around Hector. Also, the body was aged. If it wasn't for those tattoos, I wouldn't have guessed that it was Hector. His body was withered and old. Kai could see Franklin's interlaced fingers turning white. The man was doing his best to remain composed. That was definitely Hector then. He looked up contemplatively. Without making eye contact, he said, "The tattoos are a kind of specialized enchantments that trade your life force for empowering your magic. Their biggest flaw is that once used, you can't gain back the life force lost. The user will age the more they use it, ultimately shorting their lifespan. The enchantments can only be used in absolute defense of one's life or in defense of their master's life." Kai opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. It made sense when he had first met Hector. The man had been reluctant to discuss his tattoos, stating they were a family tradition. What must it have felt like to age so visibly in the span of one battle? "What happened to the beast?" Franklin asked. "I killed it," Kai stated without adding further details. "I see. Good. Good." He still looked upset. Unshed tears threatened to spill from the man's eyes. Another awkward moment of silence passed. Kai looked around the room, examining the furniture as an excuse to break from the conversation. This was not the first time he had to report bad news to someone. It wasn't something he liked doing or even wanted to, but he felt it should come from him since he had found the corpse. "Is there something you would like as a reward?" "No, but you just reminded me." He pulled out the coin pouch he had taken from Hector's body. While he had used some of the money, he had ended up replacing it when he got to his dorm. This belonged to Hector. Taking the pouch, he bounced it up and down in his palm a few times before it vanished out of sight completely. "I didn't come to tell you for a reward. I just thought, if it was me, I'd like to know what happened. Sometimes we aren't giving that benefit. It wasn't strange for people to sometimes disappear when venturing out of civilization. Many friends he had made before he died had gone missing. You speak as a man who has also experienced loss." Kai stood. "This is the Myriad of Worlds. We all experience loss." Just as Kai was about to leave, Franklin's hand extended. Grasping the hand, he heard, "Thank you, Kai. I understand you didn't have to bring me this information. Despite being my servant, Hector was something of a brother to me. It's good to have closure," he said that last part softly. "I am in your debt, Kai." Walking outside, Kai was reminded he never had closure for his first life's parents. He had immediately been thrust into battle after they died. He fought until he finally fell. Upon awakening in his new life and body, he had been an infant, and while he thought about them often during that time, he never had a chance to mourn them and say goodbye properly. The next time Kai visited home, he would construct a small grave or some kind of markings there as an altar dedicated to his parents. Chapter 43. Discussion. The next day, Kai set off to see Trika. Andre had opted to join him and Akane for the outing. Even a few days later, things were still getting back to normal for everyone after the devastation of the earthquake. Stores and houses with missing windows or broken glass could be seen as he entered the more run-down part of the city. There hadn't been any broken windows at the academy, proving the higher quality material had survived the natural disaster. Rubble and glass littered the ground. He imagined thieves were having a field day with the open access into some of these stores. Not that a pane of glass would deter determined thieves when magic was involved. It went without saying that the city officials were probably less in a hurry to clean up this area compared to the wealthier sections. Overall, the people seemed in good spirits. As normal, Kai got lost in the poorly designed city layout. His sense of direction wasn't the greatest, but he had also only visited the Kamalash Inn and Tavern once, and had come from a different direction. Andre wasn't much help since this was a part of the city he hadn't yet visited. "Why are we heading to this inn again?" Andre asked Kai. "I want to send a message to my family. I haven't sent them anything in months." He had received 2 letters from his family that had mysteriously been delivered to his room. Inside the letters, his mother had written that the family missed him, that they were thinking of him every day, and asked how he was doing. Though they had been about ordinary home events, they had warmed his heart to read. Now he felt like a horrible son because he had been so caught up in everything going on for the last few months that he had forgotten to reply. He gulped thinking about his mother. He was honestly surprised she hadn't tried visiting him yet because he hadn't sent any mail back home. His mother could be a little overbearing at times. Andre appeared confused. "I'm still at a loss. Why aren't you using a normal courier service?" He was beginning to regret bringing Andre with him today. He had always been discreet and mysterious about his home and origins for obvious reasons. But as far as he understood, Trika didn't know about his home either. He wasn't really sure how she would get a letter home for him, but he was just doing what his father had instructed him to do. After 20 seconds, Kai realized he had yet to answer Andre. "I don't know. It's an obscure, out-of-the-way village. I don't think it's a place the couriers deliver." Andre looked more puzzled than before. 2 minutes later, they found the inn and tavern. It looked so old and rickety from the outside, just as he remembered, but even more so now with all its windows broken. Andre tugged on his sleeve. "Kai, are you sure this is the place?" "Yay, this is it. Why?" "I just have a feeling I'm more likely to get stabbed and robbed than make it back home unmolested all of a sudden." "You'll be fine. Probably, I told you to wear your worst clothes." "What are you talking about? These are my worst clothes." Kai rolled his eyes. Andre's worst clothes were still many times better than his best. Not that he minded. The difference between normal hemp material and illustrious or exotic material had no difference in his mind. A shirt was a shirt. The functions were the same no matter what type you wore. Whereas armor was different, because armor had different functions and levels of protection depending on its material. Walking into the inn and tavern, Kai was assaulted by the stench of beer. It was an hour or two until lunch would begin in full. The bar and eating area had a few occupants here and there, some already nursing drinks so early in the morning. Andre received the odd looks that were making him uncomfortable. At the counter was a young boy with auburn hair that Kai recognized as the boy who took their bovines into the stables when he had first visited nearly 5 months ago. The boy's eyes screamed with boredom. "How can I help you?" he mumbled. "I am here to see Trika." "Trika," he yelled suddenly, "you have debt collectors here." "What?" came a cry from the back room. A curtain dividing the 2 rooms parted. Trika's head popped out, her eyes scanning back and forth until they landed on Kai. She came into view completely, wiping flour off her hands against her apron. The self-satisfied smirk the boy was sporting vanished as Trika smacked him in the back of the head. Powdery flour caused his hair to turn white. "That's for messing with me," she said to the now white-haired boy. Kai watched on amused now that someone else was on the receiving end of Trika's mischief and pranks. Jerking her head back, she said, "Go clean yourself up. You look pale." The white-haired boy slumped his shoulders and disappeared behind the curtain, muttering something Kai heard as child labor. "Excuse him, my great-nephew. He suffers from a deplorable case of boredom. Unfortunately, I have the joy of babysitting him when his parents are working," she said. Her face told Kai it looked like anything but a joy. "So the prodigal son returns." She shook her head. 5 months, Kai. 5 bloody months." "Sorry, I've been busy," he said lamely. "Don't apologize to me. It's your mother that has been worried." Gosh, even Garen had the foresight to send a letter once a month placating her. He grimaced. His mother had an overprotective side and constantly worried about her children. No doubt Kai had made her worry even more by not sending any mail back. "I'll do better. I have a letter for the family here." He pulled out a sealed envelope from his pocket. Swiping the envelope from his hands, she said, "Good. Hopefully it's not too late. Do you two want to stay for lunch? It's on me." Teleporting onto the counter, Akane looked excited at the prospect of a free lunch. Flinching back, Andre yelped. He had never seen Akane teleport before. Something akin to fear passed through Trika's eyes. "Never mind. I can't afford to feed you 2 and 1 of those damned foxes." After their visit to Trika's and lunch elsewhere, Kai and Andre split up. While Andre headed over to shop, Kai opted to return to the academy. His history professor, Mr. Davenport, was sitting on one of the campus benches along the path. He seemed engaged in reading an old, tattered book until he peered above the pages and took note of Kai. Nodding to the man, Kai remained silent as he passed. "Kai, do you have a moment to chat?" The old croaky voice called out to him. "Sure, Professor. Sorry to take some time out of your day, especially on this wondrous, rare, sunny day." Mr. Davenport's lips twitched with humor. Kai arched a brow at the bad joke. "Yes, you don't see light like this very often," he deadpanned. There was a sigh in his heart as he stared up at the enchanted lights. Sometimes he wished there was a weather setting for the enchantments above. It was boring to have sunny weather every day. "Please take a seat." He gently patted his closed book against the bench seat next to him. Sitting, Kai's mind began spinning. He had no idea what this was about. In fact, he wasn't even aware that the professor knew his name. "You're not in any trouble, Mr. Kai. In fact, it's the opposite," he said, seeing Kai's obvious tension. "I owe you an apology for what happened to you on your expedition a few days ago," Mr. Davenport solemnly stated. "You see, it's my fault you ended up in Group 2 and by extension suffered so much during your trips." Attention fully on the withered old man. Kai remained silent from shock while he digested the information the professor had just relayed. "I happened to witness your little interaction with Jason on the first day of classes. Call it being nosy, but I intervened by manipulating the roster of the expedition groups. I ended up placing you, Jason, and his 2 friends all in the same group. You were never supposed to be in Group 2, but in Group 1 with Lady Ashley and Prince Nicholas." Kai gawked at the news. His mind spun as his emotions passed from annoyance, then anger at all the unnecessary trouble he had gone through. Even though everything had worked out for him in the end, the danger he had faced was too much to ask someone in the Foundation realm to handle. If he had been in Group 1, he would have never had to fight the Grove Panther with that troubled group, or have his group ambushed by the bear. "Why?" he asked, bewildered. "If you can believe it, it's because I wanted Jason to start to learn and respect those he considers beneath him. An old friend asked me to look after him and help guide him. What better way to teach him some humility than to become rivals with a so-called commoner with potential? You should have been safe, at least in the first trip." Mr. Davenport cast his eyes down into his lap. "Believe it or not, it's still in debate among the nobility if the decision of the headmistress was the correct one or not. Her reasons, or so she claimed, were for the greater good, that coddling the students would only impede the development of the kingdom and its future leaders. Only real danger could make the students grow and want to train harder. I'm sure she thought she was doing the right thing because of the delicate situation with the kingdom participating in war," he spat. If I had known she would make such a decision right before the first expedition, I would have done everything in my power to stop it. Then why not just take the students on more expeditions? Kai asked. It seemed like a simple idea. If it was levels or dangers that were lacking, simply taking the students on more expeditions would fix that. It's not that simple. There is a delicate balance around these parts. Only a few areas have monsters that new students would be capable of fighting, and those monsters have suffered from overhunting in these last few decades. Other possible expedition sites are much farther away, making trips take days instead of hours. Now, with the purge of the forest complete, we have one less place to bring students. I understand now, Kai said. Assuming Mr. Davenport was telling the truth, the wizened man had no ill intentions towards Kai. He was just a piece of a board that the man maneuvered to suit his needs. Kai had just been unlucky to be in a group where such bad encounters took place. Wait, how did the bears make it into the forest undetected? How did the bears enter the forest? I thought all expedition sites were scouted out beforehand. They are days before. An ash warden has been dispatched to investigate why a group of earth spike bears would suddenly move out of the mountains and into the forest. I'm sure this has already been considered, but is it possible someone lured them there to kill a specific student? If you are referring to Prince Nicholas or another student, then anything is possible. It's doubtful that someone would try to kill the prince, as there would be nothing to gain by doing so. There was a minute of silence as students passed by the two on the bench. During that time, Kai looked at the spine of the book in his professor's hands. It wasn't one he recognized, which was no surprise since he didn't read a lot. During the silence, Kai realized this was his best opportunity to ask a question that had been haunting him for 16 years. A question that only a man who had lived nearly 1,300 years could answer. I have a question if you wouldn't mind, sir. I think after everything that has happened, you have the right to ask quite a few questions. Breaking eye contact, he asked, I was wondering, he inhaled a deep breath of humid air, if you knew of a human named Lucian Bishop. Kai felt restless as he waited for the professor to answer. Each millisecond that passed felt like an eternity as he watched the professor's mouth finally open. How nostalgic. Mr. Davenport's eyes were unfocused. That's a name I haven't heard in nearly 100 years. What do you want to know? He asked. Kai's body went cold. 100 years. That meant Lucian might be alive. He shoved his hands into his pockets as he felt them start shaking. What do you know about him? Where is he? How strong is he? Kai belted out quickly. Calm down, Kai. You need to get a grip. Mr. Davenport gave him a serious look of consideration. He looked like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. His fingers tapped along the spine of the book. Lucian Bishop is a legend of the human race. Hero, savior, and leader, he helped humanity advance further than almost anyone else. I don't know exactly what you are looking for. After all, the man has lived as long as me and has accomplished much during that time. We could sit here and spend days discussing his accomplishments. Then he still lives to this day? He stuttered. His heart pounded fiercely in his chest. Mr. Davenport merely shrugged. I don't know. He seems to have fallen from the limelight in the last few hundred years. I haven't heard any news about the man in a long time. Whether he is alive or is dead, I'm afraid I can't tell you. Lucian, a hero? What kind of hero kills his best friend for no good reason? His chest beat hard as his mind spun with questions and thoughts of the past. He heard a muffled, Kai, Kai. Blinking, he turned to his professor, who had moved closer to him and had a look of concern on his face. I'm sorry, Professor, I have to go. Abruptly standing, he started walking away. His heart rate started returning to normal, but his mind still spun. Lucian, if you are still out there, then one day I'll find you and force you to tell me why you betrayed me. Chapter 44. Day of Remembrance. Kai waited impatiently for his family to arrive. It had been a month since he sent the letter and 2 weeks since he received a reply back, letting him know they were coming to visit. Akani slept on the front counter of Trika's inn, obviously more relaxed than Kai. He closed his eyes for a few minutes, letting the time pass until he heard the front door open. "Kai!" yelled a familiar voice that was full of energy. Like a speedster, a small bundle of energy crashed into him with such force he had to take a step back. "Oomph!" he let out. Arms circled around his chest, and a pair of golden eyes filled with life and vibrancy stared into his. "You miss me that much, Squirt?" "Yay," Ariel sniffled. "The number of chores I have to do have increased since you left." She gave him a small smile. "Well, someone has to curb your energy somehow." He gave her a smile. Kai watched the rest of his family come into the inn. Everyone had shown up except his older brother, reunited after what felt like 5 long months. Not even letting him finish his hug with his sister, he felt a second pair of arms wrap around him. "My son," his mother said softly. Kai felt at peace. It was easy to forget all his troubles when he was with his family. Peeling himself off the two, he noticed his father and younger brother Jacob stood off to the side patiently. Jacob merely nodded at Kai, too embarrassed to greet his brother. Lydia appeared last, looking tired, not bothering to get through the mess of humans in the entryway. She just waved to him. Human mortal. Human mortal. Human foundation level 67. Ariel and Jacob were both in the mortal realm since they had yet to turn 16. "I'm at a higher level than Lydia now. I guess she doesn't do much hunting as an enchanter. And Jacob still has 2 more years." Kai wondered if Jacob had slain any monsters in the forest yet. To his knowledge, at the time he left for the academy, his brother hadn't yet killed any monsters. His father's boots made the wooden floor creak as he walked over. Placing a hand on Kai's shoulder, he gave him a once-over and nodded. "Not too bad. You're advancing quicker than I thought you would." Kai frowned, recalling the recent traumatic forest events. A month had passed since that day, and although it had been very beneficial, it wasn't something he wanted to experience again so soon. From nearby, he heard his mother greet Akane. There had been no surprise laced in her voice. Either she knew Akane had joined him, or they had deduced Akane joined him after so long. "You didn't say how long you were staying in your letter," he asked his father. "Not too long, a few days at most. We're here for the Festival of Remembrance, and because a certain someone made his mother worry," he said the last part amused, then leaned in and whispered, "But it's mostly because of you." Kai had the decency to look guilty. Although having his family visit was the best unexpected outcome for not sending letters home until last month. Behind him he heard, "Trika, look at you, you have wrinkles now. And you haven't aged a day, you freak of nature." Kai saw a smile peeking out from Trika's aged face. The 2 ladies hugged and started whispering so quietly that Kai couldn't hear what they were saying. Kai, Ariel tugged on his sleeve, grabbing his attention. "I want to see your school." "Later. I'm not even sure if you're allowed inside. How about we all have some lunch?" "Trika." His mother cast the inn owner a glance. "Fine. I was just preparing it now," she said. Suddenly she froze. "Wait, how many foxes did you bring? I might not have enough food prepared." Her eyes looked haunted, as if she was remembering something. Her body began subtle trembling. His mother laughed. "Only Sigma, and of course Akane, who is staying with Kai." Next to Akane was the larger fox, Sigma, who had remained quiet during all the introductions. Whereas his counterpart, Akane, had her stomach growling for the last hour, and it had only been 4 hours since she last ate. Her stomach was a great mystery, absolutely unfathomable. Good. I might have enough to serve the rest of the patrons after all," Trika muttered to herself as she vanished behind the curtains. All of a sudden, Trika came running back, grabbing onto his mother's shirt. "Wait, no, not Sigma. You did this on purpose." Her eyes were downright fearful. "Please, Rachel, I don't want the guards camping at my door for months again." Tears began forming in Trika's eyes as she shook her head fiercely. "The guards wouldn't leave until you moved out," she cried. "My gods." Sigma made an old woman cry, and Kai was certain this wasn't the first time. Grabbing Trika's hands, his mother held them in hers. "It's going to be all right." Sigma promised he wouldn't raid the royal pantry again, or all of the other stuff they alleged but had no proof of. His mother's eyes shifted away guiltily, giving Kai an idea that most of the accusations were in fact true. Akane stared in amazement at Sigma, who sat with his chest puffed out and had the proudest damned look on his fox face. Kai's back chilled when he saw Akane's eyes shift to him for a moment. "Don't you dare, Akane," he warned, knowing she was getting ideas. He knew it was a losing battle when Akane licked around her mouth. The seed had been planted. "Fine," Trika hiccuped. "You better pay. I can't afford to stay open and feed your damned foxes." As she went behind the curtain again, "Thank gods I prepared for this." Sitting down, Kai enjoyed the relaxing meal, though the other patrons learned the true terror of multiple foxes competing for food. Everyone watched as Akane and Sigma devoured food meant for the 20 patrons, and then casually signaled for seconds. As the competition fiercely raged, Akane proved victorious when Sigma collapsed into a food coma after 2 hours of constant eating. A bedtime story was born that day of the foxes of gluttony who would eat little children who misbehaved. "How did it turn out like this?" Kai muttered to himself. In front of him, his sister, Lydia, and the 12th prince of the Ashbourne kingdom, Nicholas, were shamelessly flirting. It hadn't even been 5 minutes since they had met up with his family. When Nicholas found out Kai was going out to the festival, he brazenly invited himself. After introductions were given, in which Kai noticed Nicholas pointedly avoided introducing himself as a prince, his parents left unexpectedly, only telling their children to have fun at the festival as they were going to have a date alone, leaving Kai, Lydia, and Nicholas to babysit the other 2 children along with Akane, who stayed with them. But now, Kai had most of the responsibility for babysitting, while the 2 in front of him flirted and paid no heed to those behind them. "You enchanted that yourself?" Nicholas leaned in towards Lydia. He was holding her wrist as they walked down the street, examining a green band with silver lettering inscribed around it. "That's amazing. The inscriptions look like a work of art." There was a faint blush on his sister's face. "Thank you," she said softly. Kai rolled his eyes. This was not how he foresaw today happening. On his side, Jacob pointedly ignored the 2, keeping his eyes trained on all of the stalls and decorations around. While Ariel was staring at the 2, her face made up in disgust. Akane whined softly in the arms of Ariel, although Kai wasn't sure if it was because of the flirting, the way she was being dangled from Ariel's arms, or all the food around them, so close and yet so far. Turning onto the main road, the group was heading towards the central plaza. "What should we do first?" "Akane wants food," Ariel said. "She always wants food. Besides, Akane just had a late breakfast 2 hours ago." The crowd was dense on the main road. Throughout the crowd, Kai saw numerous guards spread out among the citizens. The general air of the crowd was very cheery and joyous, the opposite of what he expected from a nation at war. Remembrance Day was a holiday for the celebration and remembrance of humans' origins. Kai wasn't sure how he felt about the holiday. Earth always had more importance in his first life, but now it seemed like a myth or legend that parents told their children until they passed down the Earth tales for generation and generation. The group slowly approached the central plaza. A huge crowd had circled an empty podium, set in the middle of the square. It looked to be made of ash stone. It was as if one solid rectangular block had been constructed in the square. How do they dismantle something that looks fused together? "Kai, how is the academy going?" Jacob asked as they waited with the crowd. It seemed like there would be a speech happening shortly. How to answer that? It's had its ups and downs. I've had moments where I really struggled and others where I thrived. I'm sure it's different for everyone, Kai said, keeping his eyes on Ariel, who couldn't seem to stand still. "I see. You didn't say much of anything in your letter," Jacob pointed out. "Well, you know how Mom is." "I didn't want to worry her," Kai said. "Are you still planning on attending the academy?" "I'm not sure anymore," Jacob said oddly. Growing up, Jacob had always emulated Kai and their older brother Garen, training with the sword and the way they acted. He seemed like an impressionable younger brother who wanted to follow in his older brother's footsteps. Now he seemed to be branching away from that path. As an older brother, Kai was happy to hear that. "Why is that?" he asked. "It's complicated," Jacob blushed. Could it be? A few minutes later, one person began pointing toward the sky, and then another, until many were all looking at the sky. Above him, Kai could see nothing at first except the enchanted fake lights covering the entire city. A few seconds later, a silhouette appeared, followed by another. They quickly descended into the middle of the crowd, landing on the podium. Welcome, everyone. Today we celebrate the anniversary of humans' arrival on the Myriad of Worlds. It's been 1267 years since the fateful day that brought millions of humans to New Earth. Throughout all of the hardships and dangers, we humans have come far in that time. But today is not the day to celebrate all we have gained and achieved, but to remember and honor our origins and those that sacrificed their lives for us, so we can enjoy the opportunities we have today. Holding up an ale glass to the crowd, he yelled, "To Earthlings!" "To Earthlings!" everyone yelled, each holding up a fist or glass. Kai smiled lightly. He felt pride as the people around him unknowingly honored him. His smile turned to a frown as he remembered that he was villainized, and none of these people were probably celebrating his accomplishments and sacrifices. The mood was jubilant as everyone was rowdy and loud. Jacob and Ariel looked as if they were struggling a bit. They were not used to densely packed crowds and noises this loud. It was a very different experience from the quiet village they had grown up in all their lives. Recognizing a person who had been behind the group for some time, Kai moved up between the two lovebirds and put his arm around their shoulders. "Nicholas, we have a man that has been following us for some time," he whispered very quietly. "I know. It's one of the royal guards. Otherwise, they wouldn't let me walk around out here today," he whispered back. "Royal guard? Are you royalty?" Lydia's eyes shined brightly. "Lydia, keep your voice down." Kai kicked the back of her shoe. "Hey, don't kick me," she growled. She tried to kick him back, but he deftly dodged and walked back to his younger siblings. Grabbing Ariel's hand, Kai signaled to the others to follow as he pulled her past some people who had crowded them into the square after they had arrived. "What now?" Lydia asked. A small whimper came from Akane, still trapped in Ariel's arms. "Food?" questioned Ariel. Lydia looked to Kai and the others, who just shrugged or nodded affirmation. "Okay, let's get some food." They walked down to the food vendor section. There were plenty of restaurants open, but none of the group wanted to sit down and wait inside. They moved around checking out the abundance of options, but no one could agree on anything. Getting frustrated at their lack of choice, Akane barked out a few times. "Akane says she's tired of waiting, so she is going to pick," Ariel interpreted. Promptly jumping out of her hands, Akane began guiding the group through the crowd with a destination in mind. Nicholas leaned towards Kai. Can she really understand the fox? Kai shrugged. Akane isn't difficult to understand. She is motivated by a love of food, sleep, and more food. Her vocabulary is probably limited to those subjects, Kai joked. Akane finally narrowed in on one stall with a small line. Above the wooden stall was a sign reading, "Fried chicken." Kai knew what chicken was. The animal had been brought over by some individuals when they arrived in the Myriad of Worlds. But to his knowledge, he never had it fried before. It soon became their turn as the line moved quickly. Two men manned the stall, one at the front, the other at the back. They both wore a headband around their foreheads with their sleeves rolled up. The person behind was cooking as he dunked breaded lumps of chicken into the oil. Right after dumping, his hand was flared up with fire, aimed underneath the metal containers holding the oil. It bubbled until he ladled the now browned chicken out of the oil. "Good day, ladies and gents. What can I interest you in?" The menu below the window only had 3 choices. The options were fried chicken wings, fried chicken sandwich with pickles, or fried chicken and waffles. Kai had no idea what any of those tasted like, but if he was going purely off the smell, he had found himself in the divine realm of food gods. "Can I get 4 of each item?" Ariel told the front man. "Oh, and 1 more chicken and waffles." "Coming right up," the man excitedly said. His eyes gleamed at the prospect of a big customer order. Turning to the rest of the group, "Okay, I ordered for Akane and me. What are you guys getting?" Lydia sighed, whereas Kai just chuckled. After everyone ordered, there was a small debate about who would pay, with Nicholas insisting since. Kai assumed he was trying to get on his sister's good side by offering, but he was firmly rejected when instead Akane jumped onto the counter and paid for everyone. Coins began appearing magically from thin air in front of her. It had given the man at the front a small scare, but his eyes lit up when he saw the miraculous appearance of a currency-producing fox. Everyone nearby seemed to take note of Akane's miraculous ability to produce coins without a visible item. When everyone received their food, they sat down at a bench nearby that had been set up for the event. An explosion of flavors hit Kai's mouth on the first bite. The crispy, crunchy texture, combined with the juicy, tender chicken, literally rocked his world. The fried chicken had turned out to be one of the best-tasting meals he had ever had. He was almost tempted to get in line again, but it had grown substantially since they had been eating. After eating, the group wandered around enjoying the sights to pass the time. They came across something called a circus. During the circus, they had what looked like tamed monsters performing tricks and making cool magical effects. Kai thought it was a bit lackluster, but his younger siblings seemed to enjoy the show. "What should we do now?" Nicholas asked the group. "I don't know. There is something called a fireworks show tonight, but that won't happen until the light enchantments turn off," Lydia said, reading a pamphlet. "Why don't we head over to the academy and see the fireworks?" Nicholas purposed. "Why the academy?" Kai asked. "Fireworks are best enjoyed from dark, quiet places. There is too much going on here to really enjoy them." With Nicholas's influence, the group entered the quiet academy grounds easily. With nobody around to bother them, Nicholas led the group to an empty small hill on the far side of the training grounds. Kai sat with his two younger siblings, while Lydia and Nicholas cozied up to each other. The fireworks turned out to be fire magic being shot into the sky. Shapes and animals were formed by the fire and would move around, telling a tale, as if in a play. It had been a memorable day that had let Kai forget his troubles just for one day. Chapter 45, Family Time. "Feels like forever since we've last sparred." Cracking his neck, Octavian pulled a sphere of metal from his storage ring. It hovered in mid-air above him for a second before it began melting into a liquid metal substance and taking shape of a sword. Around them was a poorly built stone wall surrounding the small field they were about to fight in, behind the Kamlash Inn and Tavern. Not giving him time to form his weapon, Kai dashed toward his father. He held nothing back as he jabbed at his defenseless father. The cold iron sword missed, hitting the air as his opponent vanished from sight. Kai frowned, noticing the forming sword overhead had likewise vanished. A polite cough rang out behind him. His feet shifted in a half-circle, leading from one strike to the next, but they all missed under the superior speed of Octavian. Knowing it was futile, he activated a gravity pillar over his father, who looked completely unperturbed inside of it as a smile came to his annoying face. His father's formed sword was still missing, but Kai didn't have time to think about it as his father went on the offensive. Instead of attacking with his signature metal, he attacked with his bare hands. Each strike against his sword shook his arms and hands. After a couple of exchanges, his arms felt heavy and sore. Each strike seemed to push him to his limit quickly, as they were fast and unforgiving. Feeling his body would break soon, he started switching in, heavy blow between alternating attacks when he was able to manage one. Each blow resounded with a loud clang as they connected, sword against hand. Retreating backward, Octavian followed Kai, leaving his gravity pillar. Knowing it would put him at a disadvantage, Kai activated his domain as the fight continued. His sword fighting became less finessed under the increased gravity and more brutish in nature. He grunted as the heavy blade swung and struck his father's impossibly hard fists. The cold iron sword seemed to vibrate and shake, something that had never happened in any fights he had been in. It was as if his father's hands and skin were made of flesh-colored metal. Feeling the cold, cool feel of metal against his neck, Kai stopped his overhead swing. Sheathing his sword, he held his hands up. "I give." He wanted to punch his father's amused face if he was being honest. Knowing he had been played and toyed with the entire fight aggravated him, but that was to be expected when there was such a difference in levels, stats, skill total, and experience. The cold metal moved away from his neck. "I don't know if I should be hurt or proud," his father said. "You really tried to kill me there." Kai gave him a look of annoyance. "I fully believed in your capabilities to best your Foundation realm son." That earned him a smirk in response. "Did you figure out what I was doing during the fight?" If I had to guess, you kept your formed sword floating in mid-air in my blind spots or above me, just out of sight while I kept my eyes focused on you as I defended and attacked, he pointed out solemnly. I wonder what Mom would say if I told her that you were taunting and teasing me during sparring, he half joked. You little brat, his father grinned. Well, you are not wrong. Kind of takes the fun out of the little guessing game. His father's smirk turned sulky. The sword moved around until it hovered behind his father and started shifting into a chair. His father did the same for him, summoning another ball of metal and turning it into a chair opposite his. Sitting down, Kai waited for his father to start. You must have gone through a lot to have nearly advanced to the forging realm so soon. He gave Kai a look of compassion and understanding. I would like to hear about it if you would tell me. Kai began telling him everything, from Akane's sudden appearance to his first expedition and finally to the last expedition and his narrow survival without holding back any details. He spent over an hour retelling everything. I'm sorry you went through something so harrowing so early, Kai, and I'm sorry about you losing your friend. You will find that a common occurrence in these cursed worlds. There was a slight venom to his father's words. From the tone of his voice, Kai could tell his father wasn't unfamiliar with losing people either. I'm sorry for who you lost as well, Dad. He received a sad nod in response. I think we need to break down our fight, his father said, his eyes looking up at the enchanted lights. You have improved quite a lot in this past half year. I can see you've begun to find your own style of fighting in combination with your magic. But you have some glaring weaknesses still. They're not entirely your fault, but they are something to look out for. I already know I lack the capabilities to handle multiple opponents and detect objects or people outside of my vision, Kai said. It was a little disparaging to point out your own flaws. His mood was sober as he thought of possible solutions. The only answer he could come up with was more skills that would cover those weaknesses. Hopefully those would come as he advanced. His gravity magic was in a sense a control type of magic until it had enough force to outright crush his opponents. But if it didn't stop his opponents, he would become overwhelmed in fights against multiple foes. It was different than his blood magic, where he could easily fight many foes at once. The force of your gravity is coming around. I noticed you used your domain at the end, and from what you've told me, it sounds like you've had to fight under it quite often. If what you say is true about how your intelligence determines the amount of gravitational force, then I think you've invested into too much intelligence at this current time. What do you mean? I could still fight under my domain. Yes, you could, but you were slow and your moves were telegraphed because of how much slower your body was moving. Just imagine if you kept the same gravitational force you have now, but with a faster, stronger body. I wouldn't keep your intelligence paired with your vitality and strength until you get more abilities to mitigate the gravitational forces acting on your body. That's when the game really changes. It makes sense. I've been kind of brute-forcing my fights most of the time. His father gave him a "you think" look. Hey, it's not like my abilities give me a lot of variety as it is right now. I'm sure it will get better when you advance to the forging realm. I noticed your new armor is quite synergistic with your abilities. You made a good choice there. If only we didn't live in such a dreary kingdom, his father moped on his behalf. But it's quite fortuitous that the enchantments in the city empower the metal. It's going to be very helpful in the tournament. Kai decided to broach the subject he had wanted to discuss since his father arrived. I hope you won't be offended, but I plan to use other weapons than the sword in the coming future. His father appeared confused. Why would I take offense? I don't know. I thought your entire family uses the sword, and I know you are proud and happy that your sons followed in your footsteps. You're right. It is a proud moment for any father to have his children follow in his footsteps. But at the end of the day, you are your own person. I will still respect and be proud of you, even if you want to use something thuggish as a mace. There was definitely a dig in there. Well, I figure gravity magic would work with all kinds of weapons, he gave his opinion. You'd probably be right, his father said, so why haven't you done so yet? How am I supposed to carry them? He shook his head. I don't have a ring of storage, and too many weapons equipped would encumber and weigh me down even further with my gravity. You make a fine point, his father said, as he played with one of two rings on his fingers that Kai knew to be a ring of storage. His father was not so subtly rubbing it in his face. Akane is literally eating away at my coin. His eyes briefly shifted to the fox in question, who was napping on her back so conveniently. "How much do you have left?" his dad asked. His body shook with silent laughter. "About 1 platinum and 55 gold coins," Kai said pitifully, "though 30 of the gold coins are from that rich bastard's coin pouch the Ash Warden gave me." Octavian started laughing. "That's still pretty good. The Academy started charging me extra specifically. Every month I have to pay an extra 2 gold for food purely because Akane eats 10 times the amount of a normal human. Not counting the times we eat outside of the Academy's cafeteria." Kai's eyes beamed into the fox. While he hadn't spent that much on Akane's food so far, as time passed, it would slowly add up to an exorbitant amount. He was as much to blame for his poor money management skills as was Akane's gluttony. Octavian stopped laughing. "Akane," he said in a serious tone. Instead of punishing the small fox, Octavian turned back to Kai. "I'm sorry, I had no idea she was going to join you, or I would have given you more." "Wait, she wasn't supposed to come?" "Not to my knowledge. Your grandfather had apparently found a note from Akane telling the family she would be watching over you." "I feel like there are so many things wrong with what you just said." "Well, you better make the money last. It was supposed to last you all 3 years at the Academy." "So no getting more?" His father sighed. "Sorry, son. If you need coin, you could always get a job," Octavian suggested unhelpfully. "I know it's not your fault. Akane is a force all on her own. She will always get what she wants. But I'm sure to some extent she has been holding herself back for you. She eats 10 times a normal human in any given meal. How in the hell is that holding herself back?" Shifting his attention back to Akane, he fiercely glared at her. She was now awake and ignored them as she seemed to be stalking something. Lizard, Foundation Level 2. A normal lizard. Was she really so bored to go after a lizard? Or maybe she was going to eat it? He had seen her ignore mice, birds, and other animals before, but it was strange she was actively hunting a lizard, if it could even be called a hunt. Watching the show, Akane pounced faster than the lizard could move. Holding its body under her paw, it squirmed about as it tried to escape. Lifting her paw, the lizard darted out and ran as fast as it could. Not letting it escape, she opened her mouth and fire spewed out, completely fire engulfing the lizard. When the flames stopped, only its charred black remains were left. Kai nearly choked when Akane swatted away the burnt husk of the lizard. It crashed into a barrel with a tiny thump and shattered and vanished into the wind. He sauntered back to her resting spot. Before going back to her nap, she made eye contact with Kai. He felt a chill wash over him as her intelligent eyes bored into his. Wow. That was cruel even for Akane. This was a side of Akane he had never seen before. He thought about asking his dad about it, but the man merely shook his head. Deciding to change the subject, he asked, "Dad, how long will you be here for?" "We plan on leaving for home tomorrow morning," he said. "Why do you ask?" Kai suspected his father already knew his question, but he didn't make the assumption vocal. "I was hoping you could watch over me while I get the last few levels and advance to the Forging Realm." His eyes were full of determination. He was only technically 11 levels away from hitting the Forging Realm. Theoretically, level 101 of the Foundation Realm would become Forging Level 1. With that, he would unlock more skills and other goodies. His father sat quietly for a few minutes, with his eyes closed deep in thought. "It's a difficult choice for me. Of course, I want to help you achieve the next realm, but on the other hand, I truly believe it is something you need to achieve on your own. There must be a risk, or you won't grow or learn at the rate you are supposed to." Kai hung his head. "Fine. Not like I can tell him I've already advanced to the Forging Realm once before." "Dad, Kai," Jacob yelled, coming through the back door. "Big news. The fortress city of Tresh fell." Kai was surprised. The war between the Heart Empire and the Ashbourne Kingdom had been raging for the last 10 months without much change. The war had primarily been focused on the pass between the Ashbourne Mountains and his home, the illusionary Misty region. The Ashbourne Kingdom had been fighting a defensive war. Rumor was the Heart Empire was spread thin, attacking 2 other countries at the same time as they attacked the Ashbourne Kingdom. Even so, they had finally made some progress in the war, with today marking the first big change with the fall of the kingdom's primary bastion against the Western nation. His father didn't look surprised or concerned. Strangely, he appeared amused, as if he predicted this outcome. The fortress city had only been occupied only by soldiers since the war began in full, and was one of the closest cities to their territory of the illusionary Misty region. "Dad, should we be worried?" Kai asked. "No, there are plenty of more obstacles for the Heart Empire to get through till they are out of the pass." "That's good to know, but I meant about our home. Has no one tried to come through our territory?" "Some tried," his father said mysteriously. Behind him, he heard the door open again. The rest of his family had come through into the yard. Seeing his sister, he felt like getting some payback for being forced to babysit all day during the festival while she flirted with Nicholas, and for the budget enchantments she had put on his sword. "Dad, did you know Lydia was flirting with a prince of the kingdom yesterday?" Kai tried to sound aghast. "I dare say we might be related to royalty in the near future." His father chuckled, obviously aware of what he was doing. "You don't say. I was afraid she was going to live like a monk her entire life. Her mother has been trying to set her up with some nice men in the village." "Dad," she yelled, her face was flaming red. "I'm afraid a simple village man won't suit her. She desires a prince." Kai snickered. Who would have thought she would aim so high? He felt himself falling back as his sister yanked the back of his chair towards the ground. She could hear her trudging away before slamming the back door she had just come through. "Is it too late to ask her to enchant my armor and sword?" Kai said, looking up into the light enchantments. "I'll talk to her." His mother shook her head, standing over him. "Gee, Kai, why do you have to upset her?" "I have to sit next to her during the trip back," Jacob pointed out. "It's part of my charm," he joked. Chapter 46, Expedition. Trap them in. Earth walls. 3 walls rose from the ground, trapping the monsters inside, with the only exit being their group. "Press them down, Kai." Answering the call, Kai used 2 gravity pillars concurrently inside the ambush area. Most of the monsters were now pressed down, unable to move, and the few outside his gravity pillars were trapped inside the raised earthen walls. "Assault team, attack!" she yelled to the 5 others standing at the ready. A mess of magic bombarded the area. Spells flew and collided with the monsters inside, each screaming in pain. "Stop your attacks," called out the same voice from before. "Your group has slain Ashclaws, Foundation Level 57. Your group has slain Ashclaws, Foundation Level 54. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 98. Unspent attributes stats available, 40. Finally, it had taken the entire expedition just to go from level 97 to 98. The group hadn't encountered anything truly dangerous during the entire trip. Every monster or beast they met had been lackluster in strength and challenge. His saved attributes reached 40. It had been annoying and difficult to save them, but he had hoped that once he reached the Forging Realm, he would have the best idea of where to put them all, when he saw the direction his magic and class were taking him. The problem was the end-of-year tournament was very soon, and he might need to spend his stats for it before reaching the Forging Realm. When the dust cleared, all that remained were remnants of tiny grey-skinned creatures and half-destroyed claws. It was overkill. All the scouting and preparation for 11 creatures at a lower level than the group's lowest level member. It was no wonder Kai had progressed so slowly over the last 5 months. Tactics were good, safe even, but it was painful to progress so slowly. It had been 5 months since his parents left. 5 months since he had joined Group 4, replacing one of the students they had lost during the botched expedition with the bears. While he had been accepted into the group, the issue was that they already had an established way of doing things. Melissa Corcano was the self-proclaimed leader of the group among the 8 other students. Kai could appreciate her desire to plan and strategize. She was careful and methodical as she led the group from one fight to the next. She picked their targets with care, making sure nothing would ever be truly dangerous for them. Kai understood her way of doing things, but to him it felt too damn slow. As the newcomer to the group, he didn't have much input into the way they did things, despite the fact that he was at the highest level among the Group 4 members. Even if he wanted to comment, what was he supposed to say? Stop being safe so we can level faster? They were right, and he was impatient. Over the 5 months, he had only one fight where he actually was able to use his sword in combat. Mostly, he was relegated to using his gravity pillar from the background, while the mages of the group used their long or mid-range spells and abilities to deal with the enemies. Everyone had a part, no matter how small, but between the lack of monsters and the lack of higher-leveled monsters, he had been leveling slowly. In his first 5 months of the academy, he had gained close to 70 levels, but in the last 5 months, he had gained 8. Frustration boiled in Kai's mind. Today had been the last expedition for the first-year students. Ever since the students and instructors died in the 4th expedition, the academy had been coddling everyone. It was a complete turnaround from their first expedition. The academy brought them to lower-level areas that did not allow for any real challenge. "Good work, everyone," Melissa said. She flicked back her blonde behind her head. "You too, Kai." She gave him a pleasant smile that felt more mocking to his bitter mind. His mood was still sour with the lack of progression. He wished he had ventured out on his own or hired someone to supervise him, but the risks of that were still too high unless you could find trustworthy people. If he ventured out on his own, he was more likely to get killed or robbed than gain a level. In his letters, he pleaded with his father to come and visit for a few days to help him gain more levels. But all he received was a reply of "too busy, good luck," which was actually in line with what he expected, but it hadn't helped his mood. His father was determined to make Kai earn it all on his own. Nicholas had been away from the academy for the last month, sparking rumors to fly around. If Kai hadn't been told by him about his extended training trip under the protection of the Royal Guards, he might have believed some of the rumors. He had asked to go with him, but was unfortunately turned down. According to Nicholas, the decision hadn't been up to him. The prince was due to return any day now, with the end-of-year tournament starting the day after tomorrow. Kai had confidence that no one in the Foundation realm should beat him. There had been a few dozen students who had, like Nicholas, taken time off from school to go level in private. Many coming back had entered the forging realm. Between the war and the incident on the trip, many students were incentivized to level up quicker, and they had the means to do so. All the other students in the group were conversing with each other, leaving Kai out as the lone wolf. He didn't know if it was because he was unapproachable due to his sour mood, or just because he wasn't the most social person, but the silence suited him just fine, or it did until he heard, "Kai, hold up a second." Stopping, he turned to the person in question. "You need something, Melissa?" There was a bit of ice in his tone. "Whoa, don't bite my head off. I just had a question," she said as they continued walking at the back of the group. They received a few looks as some of the other members turned their heads, but they quickly turned away when Kai made eye contact. He rolled his neck to ease the tension in his body. "Sorry, what do you want to talk about?" he tried asking in a gentler voice that didn't sound any better than before. She gave him a look. "It's about next year's groups. Since we are able to pick our own groups, I was going to ask if you wanted to join mine." She looked mildly embarrassed as she asked, "You're a competent fighter, and your gravity spells are great at controlling the enemy. I think you would mesh well with the group I am building. There have been already a few people who already promised to join," she said when Kai didn't respond right away. "She just wants me to join for my gravity spells. If I join, I'll never get to swing a sword." "I can't give you an answer at this time," Kai responded. "Why not?" she asked, stopping. "I don't know if I will be joining the academy next year. Besides, Akane has made it her mission to eat me into poverty," he thought jokingly. It was next to impossible to control her and her gluttonous impulses. He had almost been arrested 2 months ago when she teleported onto a vendor's stall and started eating all the food without warning. It was only when Kai had paid the man for everything did the situation finally calm down. It was no wonder his village had invested so heavily into agriculture and animal production. Akane herself ate more than 10 people on any given day. The real reason he couldn't give her an answer was that he hadn't told anyone besides Ashley of his plans to win the tournament and go to Titan Prime. If the worst happened and he didn't win, Kai wasn't sure if he wanted to come back next year. He truly didn't feel like this academy had much more to offer him. His plan was literally an all-or-nothing gamble at this point. "Well, if you figure it out, I'll keep one spot open if you like," she offered kindly. He shook his head. "Don't hold a spot just for me. I really doubt I'm coming back next year. Either I go to Titan Prime, return home, or start working or hunting monsters. I'll know my answer by the end of the tournament." Melissa's eyes were full of confusion. "I see. Best of luck then," she said, and walked faster, catching up to the others. Figures. She left quickly when she realized I wouldn't be of any more use to her. Foundation level 98. He was annoyed by his own level. It felt like he was being taunted, being so close to the edge. Without reaching the forging realm, he didn't think he could win the tournament. His progress had been decent, good even for about 10 months since he had unlocked his magic. But now it was too late. "Nicholas, welcome back," Kai greeted his friend. "Thanks, made it just in time." The prince shifted in his seat, getting comfortable. He took a wet towel out from his ring and patted his face, wiping away the dirt and blood that had been stuck to it. "Human, forging level 36. Kai whistled. "Not bad," he complimented. Nicholas gave him a smile of appreciation, which turned into a confused frown. "Wait, you only gained 1 level since I've been gone." "Don't remind him," Andre spoke up from the other side of Kai. Too late, he simmered internally. All the first-year students were sitting in the large auditorium where his introduction to magic class took place. Conversation flowed excitedly between the students until they began to quiet down as professors and instructors made their way into the room. Magically, power radiated throughout the room. There was no sound until the clinking of heels echoed throughout the auditorium. There was a collective gasp from the students as a grey-haired woman walked across to the center of the front of the room. Kai could tell at a glance this woman was powerful. It wasn't her projection of power and authority that alerted him. It was the subtle way the instructors bowed their heads unconsciously when she walked past them. Even Sven, who was one of the strongest people in the academy, dipped his head lightly. The only one who didn't budge an inch was Professor Dravenport, who looked like a stubborn statue, except for his old, squinted eyes, which followed the mysterious woman. Halting in front of the middle of the lined-up instructors, the woman faced the students. Her aged face seemed scrunched up in a dissatisfied frown. There was dead silence in the room, which made Kai glad he didn't bring Akane, or she would manage some way to bring attention to herself and, by association, him. "Students," she began with a clear voice that Kai found he didn't like. It was as if her voice projected her narcissism and downright loathing of the students before her. "This is the first time meeting for most of you. I usually only have the pleasure," she emphasized the word pleasure as if it was anything but, "of meeting students when they have committed acts that make us consider expulsion or worse. So congratulations to those of you who are still here. For those who don't have the sense to guess correctly, I am Lynn Harnpool, headmistress of the Ashbourne Academy. So this is the woman who came up with that stupid idea for the first expedition." To his side, Nicholas had a stoic face, but judging from the way he was squeezing the armrest, he was not a fan of her. "Tomorrow begins the single elimination tournament. It will last over the next 4 days. We have purposefully kept the details and arrangements of the tournament from you to keep it as even as possible for all students. Don't disgrace the school." Without even a goodbye, she walked back out. Only the sound of her heels could be heard until the door closed behind her. Taking a step forward out of the line of adults, Sven sighed. "Right. We have prepared a bracket tournament, a single elimination format consisting of 128 slots. We are aware there are just shy of 100 students among the first years now, so some will have byes in their first round. Regardless, in order to win, you must proceed through 7 rounds, undefeated, in order to claim the coveted title of best in your year." Kai shifted in his seat. 7 rounds? That didn't sound too bad. There was also a chance he could get a bye in the first round too. Unfortunately, he couldn't get any levels by simply defeating his opponents, so even winning his matches wouldn't put him over the edge to forging. And killing would obviously be forbidden in the tournament. Naturally, there will be prizes afforded to those who do well. The best rewards will be given to those who win first place, with lesser rewards given to those who place below all the way until 8th place. The promise of rewards sparked debate between some of the students. Andre looked the happiest at the prospect of rewards, while Kai could see Sean's reaction was full of fear. "All right, quiet down, quiet down. We have some rules to go over. Breaking the rules can result in disqualification, expulsion, or worse. So pay attention. Sven called out to the now quiet room. "The most important rule is absolutely no killing. Breaking this will result in the worst possible consequences. I know it seems unfair, but you will have to do your best to disable or incapacitate your opponent. A winner will be determined when one contestant gives up, is disabled, or is unconscious. The adjudicator of the tournament is fully in his or her right to determine the match's outcome at any time. A group of healers will be on standby in case of emergencies, but that doesn't mean you can go wild. The tournament will last approximately 5 days. The last day of the tournament will be dedicated to the finals. After your name is called, you have 2 minutes to enter the arena. Failure to do so will result in your immediate forfeit. Matches will go either until one party is defeated or 10 minutes have passed. Be prepared, you may have to fight multiple matches in a single day beginning on day 3. Meet at the arena first thing tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Matches begin at 10:30. There will be a special section for all students to wait in. Act appropriately. You are representing your kingdom." He looked across and down at all the students sitting. "I wish you all the best." Chapter 47. The tournament begins. "Good morning to His Majesty and the lovely citizens of the Ashbourne Kingdom," yelled a man dressed in a silver vest with slicked black dark hair. Standing in the center of the arena, he did a twirl to the audience before finally facing the king's booth. His voice projected all over, clear and loud. Kai suspected it was some kind of sound magic, but it wasn't harmful at all. "It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the annual Ashbourne Academy tournament," the announcer roared. "I am your host, Kenny Valentine." Kai, like all the other students of the Ashbourne Academy, were waiting in the basement area of the arena. It was not underground, but located at ground level. The entire basement encircled the circular arena. Windows allowed the students to see directly into the field of battle. The area was large enough for the students to be spread out underneath and not bump into others. Above the basement, the audience sat in stadium seating, leading up for hundreds of feet. Above the basement, the king sat comfortably in an ornate high-backed chair. He looked like a man well past his prime, appearing slightly younger than Professor Dravenport. True to his nickname, the Ash Monarch, he was outfitted in a grey robe, complementing his grey hair and eyes. Beautiful silver inscriptions highlighted the robe that seemed to pulse with life with every breath the monarch took. His eyes scanned all over and eventually settled on Nicholas, who was standing at the window next to Kai. So that's Nicholas's father. If the rumors were true and the king was one of those original humans from Earth, then that would make him about 1,300 years old. To his left and right were middle-aged humans with similar features. Could they be Nicholas's older brothers? It was difficult to tell who the children and parents in some families were, when a parent could easily outlive his children and even appear younger if he had attained a higher realm than his offspring. The entire arena was filled to capacity. Kai couldn't even begin to guess how many people were sitting, but it certainly was daunting to think about performing and fighting under the scrutiny of so many people. Instead of sitting at the window and waiting for the tournament to start, Nicholas went off to meditate in the back of the room. He didn't care to watch the spectacle in front of them. Kai figured this wasn't his first time attending an event like this, but he guessed it would be his first time participating in it. As always, we've kept the brackets and who is facing who a secret, so no one student has the advantage in their matches. The matches called will be randomized, so you will never know who your next opponent is until the finals. Now onto the boring stuff, but it must be said for liability purposes. The announcer began repeating the rules aloud for the entire stadium to hear. Nothing was different from what Sven had said. If you don't hear your name called today or tomorrow, then you have a tournament bye for round 1. To start the day, we will begin with the first-year students. When you hear your name called, please enter the arena. Jesse Clinetro and Maverick Douglas. Many of the first years began turning their heads to watch 2 students proceed out of the doors and into the arena. Human Foundation Level 76. Human Foundation Level 55. Most would guess that the higher-leveled person would win, but Kai wasn't so sure. Jessie appeared calm and collected as she walked ahead of Maverick. Meanwhile, Maverick was sweating bullets. He looked visibly sick as gripped the handle of his sword fiercely in his sheath. The poor kid looked pale. Fighting in general was one thing, but fighting in front of an audience of 10,000 or more was another, especially when your family and everyone you knew would be there, watching. If you lost to someone lower level than yourself, you would bring shame to yourself and your family. Knocking an arrow on her bow, Jessie stared indifferently at her opponent from the center of the arena. Her bow was aimed down near her feet in a relaxed manner. The entire audience waited for the announcer's next words. "Begin," he roared. Pulling her bow up, she let a green arrow fly before her opponent could even make it a quarter of the way to her. Maverick's shield came up, blocking the arrow. Instead of the arrow ricocheting and bouncing away, it stuck to the shield. Vines and roots sprouted from the tiny arrowhead, instantly covering the shield. The vines crawled around the edge of the shield and began whipping at Maverick, who flinched as they bashed against his armor. The vines seemed to stop growing after a meter length. Maverick slashed at the vines, chopping part of them off, only for the vines to regrow back to the same length. Distracted, another arrow flew and attached to Maverick's leg. The arrow broke apart again, splitting into multiple vines that wrapped around Maverick's leg. Instead of attacking him, the ends shot into the ground and tightened. Screaming in pain, Maverick slashed down, cutting apart the vines connecting to the ground. Just as he was finally going to move, another arrow connected to his other leg, with the vines doing the same as before. It was obvious the swordsman was growing frustrated and tired. Whereas Jessie was calmly standing in the same place, with an arrow in her bow at the ready. But instead of firing it, she simply watched Maverick struggle to escape the vines. A small smile came to her face as the vines kept growing from the source and trapping the poor swordsman. No matter how many times he cut at the vines, they kept coming back. After 2 minutes of watching the fiasco, Jessie pulled her bow up and quickly shot it. This time the arrow connected to Maverick's forehead. But it didn't pierce through, it simply stuck on. Immediately following its connection, it spouted vines that wrapped around his head. Dropping his sword and shield, he tugged at the vines and arrow, but they remained firmly attached. Kai could tell panic had overtaken the swordsman as he was probably struggling to breathe underneath the vines. "Winner, Jessie." The announcer called the round when nothing changed except more flailing by Maverick. Upon the announcement, the vines slinked back and withdrew into the green arrows. Once the vines were gone, the arrows popped off Maverick's body. Whatever had kept them attached was gone. Face free of obstructions, Maverick looked distraught. He hadn't been able to show anything during the fight and had been the first to be eliminated. As far as the audience was concerned, Maverick had failed epically. Now a new pressure had descended upon all the students to at least look good, or look better than Maverick even if they ended up losing. Maverick returned with his head hung. He appeared completely unharmed, a testament to Jessie's control and magic that seemed perfect for the competition. It looked as if she had effortlessly controlled the entire battle and her opponent, even toying with him. What an exciting fight. Congratulations to the cool and calm Jessie. An effortless win for the first match of the tournament, Kenny announced. Will Louis Febrel and Daniel Singer join us in the arena? Human Foundation Level 34. Human Foundation Level 68. Kai was a bit surprised that someone would be so low-leveled even after a full year at the academy. It was impossible to tell what each fighter was feeling as they entered the arena. Both were wearing armor and helmets, making it impossible to see their faces. Kai didn't know of Louis, but he knew Danielle briefly. The young fighter was known in the melee class for being punishing to his opponents. No one liked to spar with him unless they were certain they would win. Daniel would take it too far and hurt his opponents. He had a mean streak that everyone would probably get to see in this fight. He had never had the opportunity to fight against Daniel, as the man never moved out of Group B in melee training. "Begin!" Daniel dashed across the field. Even 30 levels lower than Kai, he was unquestionably faster. His opponent Louis stood still, only his hands moved in circular patterns as water was conjured between them. Water continued to gather as Daniel got closer. When they were only meters apart, the giant ball of water that had reached a meter across shot out of Louis's hands. People in the audience stood at what happened next. Deftly dodging the ball of water, Daniel came face to face with the unarmed Louis. The spiked club in Daniel's hand swung across and bashed the slow-reacting Louis in the side of the head. Instantly he collapsed, but that didn't stop Daniel, who swung again, fight into the fallen mage's side. "Winner Daniel Singer." Either not caring or not hearing the announcer, Daniel swung again into the unconscious mage. It was only when an adjudicator teleported onto the field and grabbed Daniel's arm that he stopped. There was a momentary pause where the adjudicator was saying something to Daniel, while healers had simultaneously found themselves onto the field treating Louis. After letting go of Daniel's arm, the adjudicator vanished, and Daniel walked back to where the students were located. Entering through the door to Kai's right, everyone gave him wide berth as he returned and sat down on one of the benches. Kai watched on as 2 minutes later, Louis stood up. The side of his metal helmet was dented partially. One of the healers helped Louis across the field into the staff area of the basement, where he was likely to receive more treatment. The next couple of matches were lackluster. The quickest fight had been between one person in the Forging realm and someone level 50 in the Foundation realm. He had no chance, as the Foundation realm kid was knocked out before he could even activate his magic. A few students were announced with buys, automatically winning their first round just to fill the tournament bracket. On the first day, only 2 people in the Forging realm ended up fighting among the first years. Both fights were quick and uneventful and did not provide Kai with any insights. Kai's name was never called as the second-year students began their fighting 4 hours into the day. Kai never heard his name called for a buy or a fight. He figured he would find out tomorrow or the next day if he was fighting or not. Either way, he was ready. A warrior was ready to battle at any time. The second-year fights weren't much different than the first. There was still a mix between Foundation and Forging realm students, but the fights tended to be more even or longer in most cases. The truly interesting fights were when the third-year students began. Kai watched with rapt attention. Would Christopher Reed and Alistair Silver please join us on the field? There was a sudden buzz and excitement in the air that couldn't compare to the previous matches. To the side, Kai heard, "Alistair has almost reached the third realm. He is incredible. No wonder he won the tournament both years prior. No one else in his year can compare." Human Forging level 56. Human Forging level 97. Kai recognized the higher-level student. Although he didn't remember if he ever got the person's name, he recognized the face. It was the student he had almost decapitated when his sword went flying during training so many months ago. The Earth Mage had been a companion of sorts on the training field. They had never really interacted after the first encounter, merely giving each other nods or waves as they kept to themselves in their training. Who knew the student was the former champion for both first and second-year students? Part of Kai wondered if it was his higher level or his skill at fighting that enabled him to win. Either way, people around him were hyped up for the upcoming fight. The audience had gone silent moments before the battle began. It was strange compared to the previous hours of fighting. Respect seemed to be given to these fighters, or maybe to Alistair. The first move was made by Christopher as a torrent of flames travelled out of his hand towards Alistair. Rocks ripped out of the ground, some were launched at Christopher, while one large flat rock made itself a shield in front of Alistair. The flames crashed into the shield rock, which began spinning round and round, causing the flames to shoot off to the side of the rock. Stopping his flame attack, Christopher took to the sky as he dodged the incoming rock projectiles. He seemed to run on the air as fire spread out in a small circular disc, formed under every step he took. Arcing through the sky, he deftly dodged the rocks being thrown at him. Meanwhile, he responded in kind with his own blasts of fire. Kai was impressed. The fighter was doing well, multitasking, dodging, and throwing spells, something none of the first years had shown. The fight was settled a few minutes later when a rock slammed into Christopher. Falling from the sky, a hand made of rock grew out of the ground, catching the fire mage. Grasped in rock hand, Christopher announced, "I surrender," aloud. Cheers rang out as he was instantly released from his constraint. The two fighters shook hands and even walked back to the third-year waiting area together, animatedly discussing something. After the fight, Kai realized that, like Jesse, Alistair had never even moved from his spot. In fact, the Earth Mage had never even taken his hands from his pockets. Chapter 48. The First Round. It was day 2 of the Ashbourne Academy end-of-year tournament. Kai felt restless as he sat on the bench inside the waiting area. There was little point to watching the current fight that was going on. Most of the first years had been uninspiring, boring even. He felt himself struggle to stay interested in most the fights going on. Only the Forging Realm students would be worth taking note of, but most of them would have buys during the first round. He checked his status screen while he waited. Name: Kaismo Cineris. Realm: Level: Foundation 98. Aspect: Gravity. Class: Vanguard. Race: Human. Health: 1150. Stamina: 500. Mana: 900. Vitality: 110. Strength: 110. Dexterity: 60. Endurance: 50. Intelligence: 90. Wisdom: 90. Unspent attributes available: 40. Active skills: Heavy Blow, 2/10. Gravity Pillar, 2/10. Domain, 1/10. Passive skills: Burden, 2/10. General skills: Identify. Pain Tolerance, 1. Sense Improvement, 1. Soul Presence, 4. Elemental Magic Resistance, 4. Physical Resistance. 4. The differences in magical classes were astounding. Some of the students fighting possessed an array of different active abilities, while others only had one. It was a curious thing to awaken to magic and yet possess 3 passive abilities off the start. It was rare, but it did happen on occasion. On the opposite spectrum, some students at this time only had active abilities. Even if 2 students both awakened to the fire element and mage class, there was no guarantee they would unlock the same skills. Gravity itself was a rare magic type. As far as Kai was aware, he was the only student with it in the academy, perhaps the entire city. And the Vanguard class was even rarer. He had scoured the library looking for the Vanguard class, but never found it listed under known basic or advanced classes. An advanced class was available to those who upgraded their first class when they reached the Profound Realm. It was possible Vanguard was a specialized class, which was an even rarer version of a basic class. Specialized classes weren't just offered like basic classes. There were unique requirements to getting offered them, which were always kept secret by families or clans that had knowledge of how to gain them. Only issue was, Kai had no idea what criteria he had hit to receive such a class. Sadly, there were no extra abilities or attribute stats that came with the Vanguard class. The only benefits that he assumed came from it were the general skills and class benefits. Kai was certain that no other Foundation Realm students from the Ashbourne Academy could match his innate physical and magical resistances that were given to him by the Vanguard class. It was a strange thing to muse about before a battle. Kai's mind wandered, thinking about the possible upgrades that would come when he advanced to the Forging Realm. Kai. He heard his name, but it sounded slightly muted. Kai. Again his name was called, but this time it was louder. He felt someone shake his shoulder. Looking up, Nicholas was standing in front of him. Kai, it's your turn. They called your name. He nodded. Thanks. Standing, he smoothed his hair down. It had grown quite a bit, and he hadn't bothered to get cut it, though it wasn't quite in his eyes yet. Nervous? Questioned Nicholas. Kai shook his head. He felt calm right now. The fight wasn't for his life, but for the direction of his life. Perhaps he should have felt nervous, but he wasn't. He believed he had prepared his best for this moment, short of venturing into the wilds and fighting monsters alone. Most of his free time had been spent training, and his level was nothing to scoff at with his lack of resources and connections after less than a year. The question was, would it be enough? Walking through the doors to the arena, the crowd roared. It was louder and clearer than when he was inside the waiting area. It felt warm as he walked out onto the dirt cover ground. Putting his helmet on, he felt the telltale signs of his armor absorbing the light from the enchantments above. Wispy patterns began forming all over his armor, causing it to lighten. After a mere few seconds, the armor's weight had been cut in half. There was a small commotion from the audience, as he was sure they were gawking at his unusual armor. His eyes found his opponent. She was quite pretty with her black hair and sharp cheekbones. With only so many people among the first-year students, he had seen her in his melee tactics course, but he wasn't familiar with her magic or skills. Since he had never talked to her before, there had been no point in learning or remembering her name. And now, because he hadn't been paying attention when the announcer called their names, he still didn't know it. Not that it mattered. She was an opponent to defeat, name or no name. Human, Foundation level 68. His opponent was 30 levels below his. There was a great chance he would win the fight without having to resort to spending his saved attribute points. The young woman before him was outfitted in a thin metal plate armor concurred to her body. Like his, it covered all her vital points. Equipped in her hand was a rapier with a fancy handguard. His eyes couldn't pick up any signs about her magic element or class. Though Kai was certain she was a melee fighter, without knowing his opponent's abilities and magic, it was futile to formulate a plan of action. It was entirely possible that his opponent knew of his abilities since they were so unique among the academy students. But that was only a guess. Even if she was aware of his skills, there was nothing she could do to stop it. Gravity was inevitable. Begin! Immediately his opponent ran towards him. A warrior scream bellowed from her as she quickly crossed the field of battle. The wind seemed to gather around her, giving her a boost in speed. Amused, Kai let her come closer. When she was only a few meters away, he activated Domain. Immediately his opponent stumbled under the newfound weight of an additional 180% gravity that tried to pull her down to the ground. Robbed of her speed, her eyes widened with surprise and fear. To Kai's eyes, she appeared to be struggling to move. Trembling, she strained her body fighting the gravity. Her arm shook as she tried to lift her rapier. Kai walked up to her slowly. With every step he took, he made an imprint on the packed dirt. 2 meters from her, he was still unarmed. His sword was still sheathed, but he kept a hand on the handle, ready at a moment's notice. "Surrender," he called out, offering her an out. He eyed his mana, which was still sitting at 95% after 20 seconds of his domain. He waited as she contemplated his question. Any one reasonable person would surrender, especially when that person couldn't even move. Only his opponent was apparently anything but reasonable as she shook her head. Then came something he hadn't expected. "Fight me without your gravity," she yelled. Her face dripped with sweat and her breathing labored as if just yelling had been a task for her. Kai had been too shocked, or else he would have laughed. He blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "Yes," she groaned. Her legs were beginning to buckle as they bent slightly. "Why should I?" he asked. His curiosity had gotten the better of him, and she wasn't going anywhere. "My parents are watching," she gritted out. Recalling the first round of the tournament, Kai felt for the girl. It would suck to have to end the year with nothing to show for it. Kai mulled it over. "I can just reactivate my domain if it's going bad, and I won't have to fight again until tomorrow at the earliest," which would give him plenty of time to recover resources. His opponent had to be pretty worn down already, coupled with the fact that his passive ability, Burden, was draining her of her stamina even as she struggled to stand there. Kai still felt fine. He was used to this pressure. Although his body was heavy under it, he had trained quite often under such conditions often for the last 5 months. His body had gotten much stronger physically, not counting the attributes and gravity mitigation he had helping him. If she wanted to have a spar with blades, he would oblige her. He was confident he would win. Kai sighed. "Fine. But first, what is your name?" he asked sheepishly. Her reaction mirrored Jason's when he often stared at Kai. "Emily," she grunted, obviously unhappy. "All right, Emily, let's see what you got." Immediately his gravity ceased. Predictably, she launched across the remaining 2 meters to him. Her rapier aimed at his chest. Whipping out his cold iron sword, he parried the rapier, knocking it and her arm up and across her body. He didn't counter despite the easy opening, since he wanted this fight to last longer. He felt the winds change when her arm quickly returned to position. Her element of wind seemed to help her maneuver her body. "I guess we never discussed her not using magic." He swung with a short, compact swing, gauging her speed and response. Deftly dodging, she rapidly jabbed back at him. Each strike was fast and swift in its attempt to break his defense. Every time his sword came up to block her strike, she withdrew her arm, then struck again in a different spot. She knew she was no match for his power. They played a game of cat and mouse. Emily's sword strikes were too quick, but he managed to evade most of them. After half a minute of defending, he felt her score on his armor. Besides the sound of metal against metal, he didn't even feel her strike. A small smile came to his face. There was a certain enjoyment to be had just when sparring in a somewhat even exchange. Staying focused, Kai went on the offensive. Emily flitted back, assisted by the winds as she evaded his strike. Like a hound after a bone, Kai chased after her. She began to solely evade each strike, not even attempting to strike back at him. After a solid minute of dodging, he stopped on the field. Without his gravity to slow or stop her, he could do nothing about her superior speed. He wasn't going to waste his stamina playing games with her. She paused 5 meters away. A slight smirk was on her face as she stared at him. He felt a sense of foreboding at her smirk. Something was wrong. She isn't trying to attack. How is this showing what she learned to her parents? Whatever she was doing, Kai felt it was wrong to give her time to breathe. He charged her once again, this time putting all his energy into speed. She was late to react as he reached her. His sword slashed down into the armor of her upper arm, connecting. Emily fell to the side by the force of his regular blow. Someone from the crowd called out, "Emily!" Her armor had blocked the strike, but a small dent had formed. Even without his heavy blow ability, his strikes were a force to be reckoned with at this stage of fighting. He walked over to her prone form, his sword arm stretched out, waiting for the words. "Surrender," he stated more forcefully than before. He felt light-headed and out of breath, perhaps from all the chasing. Emily looked into his eyes, searching for something. It was when he brought his free hand to his head that she smirked widely. Whipping her rapier across, she struck at his sword as she tried to bat it away, which gave her enough time to get up and run away before Kai could strike back. She sure is a fast one, he thought. Taking a step after her, he felt the arena spin for a second. Dizziness enveloped his mind. Kai realized then he had been played. While he had been fighting and chasing her, Emily had subtly been reducing the oxygen he had been taking in. Anger flooded Kai. He tried to be kind. He even sympathized that going home in the first round would be devastating. So he thought to be kind-hearted and allow Emily to show her skills. But she had deceived him. Likely she had planned this from the moment he had her cornered, or maybe even before the battle began. Kai decided then that there would be no more games or niceties throughout the tournament. He would only be brutal and punishing to his opponents. Gravity Pillar activated over the unsuspecting Emily as she stood almost 15 meters away. Instantly, she collapsed to the ground on all fours. Inhaling deeply, Kai felt the spell broken as his lungs filled with oxygenated air. His mind became more alert. Walking to her, he watched as she struggled not to attach herself to the dirt ground, but failed as miserably. He gave a brief look to the adjudicator, who appeared to be contemplating his decision. "If you're not going to call the match now, then don't complain to me later." Stepping onto the blade of her rapier, he looked down at her once more. He offered no more surrenders. If she hadn't given up by now, then she wouldn't until he forced her. Shifting his blade in hand, he spun it around until the blunt side was facing downwards. Lifting his sword arm, he felt the resistance of his arm being inside the gravity pillar, but it was only a minor inconvenience. His arm was steady raised above her. Still, no one called the match. So be it. He swung down hard, assisted by the gravity pillar. The blunt side of his blade smashed into Emily's armored backside. Instantly, her body collapsed. Blood splashed out of her mouth. Deactivating his gravity pillar, he turned and began walking away. "Winner, Kaismo Cineris," the announcer called finally. Chapter 49, Fox Trolling King. "Good work, Kai," Nicholas called out to him. The remaining students were eyeing him as he approached his old seat. "It was nothing," he said evenly. He was frustrated with himself for showing compassion. Perhaps his family had softened him, or it had been too long since he felt any real danger from people directly. What Emily had done to him had lit a spark in him. He felt that burning anger inside. Needless to say, he wouldn't show mercy again. Both Nicholas and Andre were seated next to Kai on a bench in the back of the waiting area. Only the students who hadn't yet had their names called for the first round were present, and a few others similar to Kai who decided to stay and support their friends. Andre's first fight would be coming up soon. It was easy to tell at a glance that Nicholas was bored. The young man sat restlessly on the bench, trying to get comfortable. On the opposite side of Kai, Andre's leg bounced up and down. If he was any stronger, he might have caused the arena to shake. Their other roommate, Sean, had chosen not to fight in the tournament. It was a mystery as to why Sean had even bothered to come to the academy. He was absent most of the time and hardly trained. Letting out a sigh, he closed his eyes. The three sat there in silence, except for Andre's foot tapping the ground. Sitting and doing nothing wasn't his thing, but he wanted to show support for Andre, who had helped him quite a bit over the last year. His thoughts drifted to his family. His father's letter a few weeks ago stated he wasn't sure if he would be able to show up. Apparently the Empire was planning a huge move and incursion into the Ashbourne Kingdom in a month. How his father had received that information, Kai had no clue. As far as he remembered, his father had gone to see Garen's tournaments, but there had been no active war at that time. And for the final match of our first years today, would Andre Belton and John Frame please join us in the arena? The announcer called finally. Human, Foundation Level 53. Good luck, Andre. Kai patted his gulping friend's back. I think I need to pee, Andre nervously said as he stood. You just went twice in the last hour. Now get out there. You have 2 minutes before they disqualify you. Kai stood up and lightly pushed Andre to the door. The shield mage stumbled out of the door with nerves of jelly. A few steps behind Andre were his opponent, decked out in brown leather armor. It covered the essential areas. Most Foundation Realm students didn't own or wear full-body armor. In John's hands was a crossbow, while 2 identical daggers hung on his sides. A rogue archetype? John was only 5 levels above Andre. Should be a close match. Andre held a mace and a rounded shield in each hand. As far as Kai knew, Andre had never used a mace before. It was possible he bought it for the tournament to cover for his lacking offense. It was something to inquire about after the fight. Begin. A bolt was sent at Andre as soon as the match began. Whether intentional or not, Andre appeared to flinch, causing his shield to raise slightly, blocking the bolt as it ricocheted off. Bringing his shield down, it was obvious he had lost track of his opponent as his eyes darted all around. John was silently moving closer to Andre's left side as he stayed in the shield's blind spot. Andre looked panicked for a second while he looked for his opponent. Another bolt was shot from the rogue. Kai's eyes squeezed shut when he heard Andre's cry of pain. The bolt embedded into Andre's unprotected thigh. The match wasn't off to a good start for his roommate. John darted forward to the distracted Andre. Just when Kai thought the match would end quickly, a large rectangle of transparent barrier materialized, causing the rogue to smash into it hard. The barrier seemed to shift from a transparent silver to a transparent light blue immediately after contact. Recovering quickly, John slashed at the barrier. Almost like a membrane, the barriers parted for the dagger but started healing the damage only a moment later. On the opposite side of the barrier, Andre lunged forward, his mace overhead, smashing towards the rogue. "Look at that!" Nicholas yelled. Andre's mace had gone through the barrier on the other side as if there was no resistance. Unprepared, the rogue only barely managed to dodge out of the way. Pulling his mace back through the barrier, it shifted colors again back to silver. Black shadows of smoke began to come off the rogue's body and daggers, almost as if they were on fire. The vicinity near him turned darker as the haze of smoke filled the area. Striking back, his daggers slashed at the barrier, blocking the way. Each strike seemed to tear at the wall of energy. Dense black wisps of smoke clung to the barrier as it slowly recovered. Turning light blue again, Andre struck from the other side, but this time his ploy was easily seen through as the rogue tried to back off immediately. Only a silver barrier came up right behind the retreating rogue, stopping him as he stepped back into it. Kai was certain Andre had him until the rogue erupted into smoke. A trail of smoke moved to the side, quickly forming into the shape of a humanoid on the other side of Andre. There was a flurry of movement as Andre knocked away dagger strike after dagger strike right before they could find purchase. Although Andre was well prepared in his metal armor, there were still vulnerabilities all over that the rogue aimed for. The next few minutes became a battle of attrition. As Andre tried to defend himself from the quickly moving rogue, that shifted around him, looking for weaknesses. Andrei could do nothing to trap the evasive rogue. Every opportunity to trap him failed as the rogue just dispersed away. 8 minutes into the match, Andrei surprised everyone by surrendering. Having to form so many barriers and repairing them must have taken its toll on the shield mage, causing him to run out of mana. The audience clapped and cheered as the two combatants made their way back to the waiting area. People appreciated the back and forth between the contestants, which made for a nail-biting fight in the last match of the first round. Walking into the room, Andrei looked crestfallen. He said nothing as he slumped into the seat from earlier. The rapid rise and fall of his chest gave away his exhaustion in the intense match, despite his lack of movement. Though Andrei had shown his capabilities, his opponent had simply turned out to be a bad matchup for him. "Your Majesty," a finely dressed servant called out, grabbing the attention of what was arguably the most powerful individual in the Ashbourne kingdom. His collared shirt was impeccably neat. He wore a black tie, the symbol of servants of the nobility from the olden days. "What is it, Philip?" the king asked wearily. It was apparently too much to wish for to enjoy the tournament his son was participating in without interruption. "It's happened again. Captain Nikita just reported the palace pantry was cleared out once again." The king gave a sigh. At his age, every issue or problem that kept popping up felt like it would take him to an early grave. While this might have been perhaps the most harmless issue he has had to deal with since the war began, it was without a doubt the most mysterious. "What about the hidden pantry?" the king raised. They had stored most of the food in a second hidden pantry. Philip, his faithful servant, shook his head. "Can someone please tell me how someone is stealing food from the palace's pantry once a month for 5 months straight now?" The question was asked clearly to all of his subjects inside the arena's royal booth. There was nothing, only silence, as no one responded after 10 seconds. The king snorted. He hadn't expected a response. For 5 months, the palace had been plagued by a thief who stole not riches or gold, but instead food. Over 25 years ago, something similar happened. A lot of food-related problems had cropped up, with all indications pointing to a woman and a fox, though no substantial proof had ever been found. And the woman was not one to trifle with. Without said proof, he could not justify sending his best soldiers after a citizen of the kingdom. Not that he expected them to be capable of apprehending her or even killing her. There were both cries of sorrow and joy when the woman and her fox left the capital. Joy for those who had been plagued by their antics, and sorrow for losing such loyal customers. When that same woman returned only 5 months ago, immediately the palace had gone into a frenzy. Royal guards had been tasked with secretly surveilling her and the family with whom she came. The palace had been on the edge of a cliff, waiting for something to occur. Thankfully, nothing happened during the few days she stayed in the capital. A report came back that the woman had a child who surprisingly turned out to be a friend of his youngest son. After the connection had been found, an investigation had been warranted into the student Kaismo. The report came back describing the young man as a talented warrior using a rare type of magic. Nothing too unusual. His brother happened to be a former champion of the same tournament when he attended the academy but possessed no fox during his stay. Kaismo's fox, Akane, was notorious around the academy and food venues nearby for her obscene gluttony and being a loyal customer. Nothing of note had happened that would be a cause of concern during their time in the capital to keep the two under the radar. When the investigators tried to trace their origins to a Kitsune village, as written down during his application when joining the academy, nothing could be found. It was as if such a village didn't exist. And yet they had used the truth-telling orb during their application to the academy. A boy of a meager foundation realm could not fool an extremely powerful and rare object like that. The first time the food went missing, it had only been 1 week since that woman had left the capital, and yet it had been just like 25 years ago. With the woman and the fox missing from the capital, the prime suspects were Kaismo and Akane purely by association. They were placed under secret surveillance following the incident. Of course, an investigation had taken place, an investigation that had proved futile. It was as if the food had never existed. No traitor or internal thief had been identified. The second time the incident occurred, it was again investigated. Nothing was found. The person surveilling Kaismo and the fox reported they had both never left his sight at all on the day of the theft. Strangely, there was a post-note on the report claiming that sometime after the theft of the food had occurred, the surveilling person noted that the fox had looked towards the area where he was hiding and had a cheeky grin. The advisors clamored to bring Kaismo in for interrogation, but that notion was dismissed outright when the king remembered whose child he was. As a result of the theft, guards were posted outside the room, around the clock. Security enchantments were placed around the room. They would prevent teleportation and alert them to anyone who entered. But again, a month later, the replaced food vanished. It was baffling. The surveilling team reported that during the time of the third theft, Kaismo and Akane were out on the training field, with the former training his sword skills. Approximately 15 minutes after the theft had occurred, the fox had oddly let out a belch so loud that everyone within 300 meters heard it. The king personally hired a famous enchanter from off-world to strengthen the palace's enchantments and more specifically the pantry. It was a chilling thought when the king realized the pantry was as well protected as his own bedroom, but still the food went missing, almost like clockwork. And now, during the tournament, the food had gone missing again, even though they switched rooms to hide it. The king's head hung tiredly for a moment before he returned it to proper posture. Although he was sure no one would fault him for having bad posture at his age, his last solution was to buy storage ring for his cooking staff so they could hold the food products on their person. Somehow, he still felt that whatever deity was stealing their food would still manage to find a way. But that wasn't even the worst issue plaguing him at this time. Not even the war was giving him as much grief as his children. Specifically, his two children sitting next to him. To his right, his oldest, the first prince and heir to the Ashbourne kingdom, sat, slouching like the lazy shit he was. Charismatic and refined, Ezekiel could talk to anyone, but when it came to personal power, the boy had to be carried to his realm of power. And now he was on the other side, aging visibly just like him. He had long doubted his choice in making Ezekiel his heir, but the decision had been made so long ago in simpler times. On the opposite side was his third oldest, Samuel, the third prince of the Ashbourne kingdom. A man of action, despite having strength that nearly rivaled his own, Samuel had never shown any disobedience until recently. When growing up, Samuel had shown the most promise of any of his children, except perhaps Nicholas. But Nicholas had been born too late. Any chance he had of inheriting the throne was gone with that. Still, Samuel wasn't charismatic. He was too blunt and honest for his own good sometimes. A fine warrior he was, but a great king was not in his future. But now signs began pointing to a civil war breaking out when he passed on. It would be his greatest failing as a parent and a king if the country he created was destroyed because of a civil war between his two sons. He was aware he had held onto the throne and power for too long, afraid of what might happen. Another weary sigh escaped his lips. "Nicholas made a great showing, father," Samuel pointed out. The king perked up, only now noticing his son, Nicholas, was walking back to the waiting arena after defeating his opponent. The match must have been quick because he hadn't noticed it as he thought about his troubles. "Yes," he coughed, "Nicholas will make a fine warrior." "Of course he will. He takes after his majesty," Ezekiel said. "What a suck-up. Perhaps I should send Nicholas to Titan Prime, get him away from all this nonsense. Kaismo Cineris and Jesse Clinetro, please join us in the arena," the announcer called out. The king's eyes followed the young warrior. He wanted to see the true strength of what a child from that woman was capable of. Chapter 50. The second and third round. The students in the waiting room were reduced by nearly half by the third day of the tournament. They had been told beforehand the tournament would begin to pick up its pace after the conclusion of the first round. There were only 64 students left in the second round. With a total of 32 matches in the second round, there was a chance they would have to fight again today, depending on how quickly the matches went. Nicholas and Kai sat side by side. With Andre out of the running, Nicholas was his only companion in the irritating game of waiting. The fifth fight of the second round had just concluded. It was no surprise that the Forging Realm student had triumphed over his Foundation Realm opponent. All the Forging Realm students who had been given buys before were going to have to fight today. Most likely by the end of the day, about 75% of the students left would be in the Forging realm. Forging or Foundation realm, either way, they were obstacles to be defeated and cleared. Kaismo, Synopsis, and Jesse Clinetro, please join us in the arena. Kai felt fresh and rested. From his seat, his eyes found his opponent. It was the Vine Archer from the first round. She had looked calm and collected then, but when she made eye contact with him, he could tell it was false bravado. Her eyes turned away quickly as she marched through the doors, bow in hand. A single gravity pillar should allow him to win the match. Kai didn't think her body was as strong as his first opponent. Assuming she was successful inside the gravity pillar, Kai doubted she would have enough strength to lift her bow, let alone her body off the ground. Either way, he grabbed the knife his grandfather had gifted him in case he had to escape some vines. On the way out to the middle of the arena, he pulled his sword out. No longer would he underestimate the young warriors in this tournament. Standing across from his opponent, she was ready and waiting for the words with an arrow nocked. After a minute, the audience began buzzing and talking loudly when the match hadn't begun. It felt awkward standing there, just waiting. When a good number of the audience had their heads turned behind Kai, he joined them in looking. One of the adjudicators was discussing something with the announcer. A few moments later, there was a nod. Sorry for the interruption, everyone. The judges have made a decision. The winner of the round will go to Kaismo. There was a large outcry from the audience. Not once in this year's tournament had this happened. Even when there had been an 80-level difference, they still had to fight. Kai was shocked, but he had a guess as to the reason. "Why?" screamed out Jesse. "This isn't fair." Members from the audience likewise complained on her behalf. Some called the fight rigged, or that the judges were showing favoritism. Now, an explanation will be given. Jessie has proven to be a valiant fighter, but out of concern for her safety, we must impose that she concedes the match. The simple fact is, we can't be sure Kaismo's gravity magic won't instantly kill his opponent. In his match yesterday, someone who possessed a stronger body struggled fiercely against said magic. We can't allow a student to accidentally die because their body is currently too weak, the announcer said. His voice was full of empathy as he tried to project their desire to protect the students of the academy. But that's... Jesse looked crestfallen. This was good news for Kai since he didn't have to waste any resources in this match. He would still be fresh in case he had to fight again later. Miss Clinetro, you are welcome to fight despite the adjudicator's decision. Just know Kaismo, and the tournament committee will not be held liable should you die to his gravity. The announcer offered a solution that would be acceptable all around, but her answer was obvious by the dejection on her face. No, that's... all right, I... forfeit, Jesse said, completely dejected. Not once had Kai ever had something die instantly to his gravity. Usually his enemies suffered under the pressure until something else put them down. It was possible her organs might rupture because of his gravity. But he wasn't so sure it would happen the very second he turned his gravity on. He didn't think it was that powerful yet. Returning to the waiting area, the other students gave him looks of envy as he passed the second round without using any mana or stamina. If he did end up having to fight again today, he would be fresh. Unlike his next opponent, Kai watched the next few matches in boredom. He wasn't a fan of sitting and waiting, but it was prudent to know what kind of fighter his next opponent would be. Just knowing that might give him enough of an edge. And without knowing if he was going to fight again today, he couldn't leave the arena. The next fight was between Nicholas and a student fresh in the forging realm. It wasn't much of a fight as Nicholas handedly demolished his opponent. His ash magic was a powerful tool he used for both offense and defense. Despite being in the same realm with only a 30-level difference, the training and skill at using said magic proved the difference in the fight. During the next hour, Kai watched each student fight. Any one of them might be his next opponent. Most of the students were unimaginative in their fighting styles. They would just launch spells and hope the magic would hit or break their opponent's defense. Even some of the students in the forging realm were simplistic in their fighting styles. I guess I am the same since I can only increase someone's weight and hack and slash at them. Max Davis and Kaismo Cineris, it's your time to shine. Come on down to the arena. The announcer announced his next fight, followed by a roar from the audience. Right as Kai stood up, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "He a favorite to make it to the semi-finals," Nicholas said, looking past him. Looking at his opponent, he recognized the name and his appearance. The man wore no armor except a tight shirt that accentuated his chest muscles. The first-year student had already been dubbed the Stone Giant, a fighter with massive defensive capabilities as he turned flesh to stone. None of the opponents he had come across had been able to harm him or break his rock exterior. Max had no qualms about brutally beating his opponents down with his stone fists. "I need it," Kai said to Nicholas. Nicholas silently nodded as he turned his hands upside down. A mace of a light silver coloring materialized in his hands. Grabbing the mace, Kai hefted it with a sigh. He hadn't really had time to practice using a mace, but all he had to do was smash it into his opponent. So how much practice did he really need? With his mace in his dominant hand and sword in the other, he followed his large opponent out onto the field. A few possibilities passed through Kai's mind about how the fight would go, but only time would tell. Human, forging level 8. Max gave a savage grin as he stared down at Kai, with Kai returning his own unaffected blank stare back at him. He had seen his previous fight. Max had won without taking any significant damage, but he had used large amounts of mana as he fought. Kai had also saved 40 attribute points in any emergency. If he needed more mana during the fight, he would put them in his wisdom. If he needed more speed than dexterity, it was. "Begin." Kai bolted at the large man whose skin was already turning different shades of brown and grey as it turned to rock. Gravity pillar formed right above him with a noticeable effect as the now stone giant hunched a little. Still, it wasn't enough to bring him down. Already next to him, with the speed granted to him by light-weighing armor, Kai swung his mace using heavy blow at the giant, who reacted slowly because of the increased gravity. As he smashed into Max's arm, there was a satisfying clap as fragments and shards of rock sprayed all over. Despite likely weighing twice as much as Kai, Max shot across the ground, crashing and tumbling as his body stopped on the field close by. Turning off his gravity pillar, he activated a new one right over the determined warrior as he began standing, but Kai was already moving. Already the rocks were reforming over the shoulder, but underneath he saw blood and mangled flesh. Just as Kai was striking at the stone giant again, he had to dodge suddenly. A stalagmite of rock shot out of the ground from where he had been running to. Again, another appeared, forcing him to dodge backward. Every time the ground shook a little, he would dodge as more and more rock spikes shot out of the ground, forcing him to keep his distance from his opponent. Apparently, the stone giant was already weary of letting Kai get too close. For a whole minute, Kai evaded each stone spike until a nearly perfect ring had formed around Max. His gravity pillar was still pressing down on the stone man, but with less effect than he wanted. Still, Max hadn't moved from where he had crashed. With a circle of spikes surrounding Max, Kai had difficulty approaching him. Most likely, Max was aware of his lack of range attacks. Assuming he could indefinitely stand up to his gravity, Max would keep attacking him from a distance until Kai messed up or one of them ran out of mana. Kai's eyes darted all around, looking for solutions. Short of risking the match and running into the minefield of spikes, he had one idea. His mace smashed against the top half of the rock spike. It blew apart under the force of his heavy blow, causing shattered fragments and smaller rocks to slam into Max, who lowered his head and crossed his arms to defend himself. Grinning, Kai saw chips and cracks all over his rock exterior. Again and again, he smashed into the dozens of spikes, slowly chipping away as Max constantly refreshed his stone skin. When there was about a quarter of the original spikes left, Kai did the unexpected and dashed to Max while his head was still behind his arms. Even with his head down, he felt the vibrations underneath him. Jumping in the air, he swung down with his mace and sword, feeling the tremble of gravity assisting his strike. As he was coming down, something happened that he didn't expect. A spike of stone emerged underneath Max, angled at Kai's incoming form. As the spike grew quickly, Max was pushed back out of the way, while Kai's mace struck the tip of the spike in front of him, causing rocks to crash into his body and everywhere else. Only through his many battles did his eyes stay open as fragments bounced off his armor and helmet. Through his peripheral vision, he saw two more blunted spikes coming at him from both his left and right. Spinning, Kai's sword slashed through the middle of one, slowing its growth. While still in mid-spin, he flung his mace at Max using heavy blow. The mace rocketed quickly as Kai's muscles protested under the force of throwing it. Before he could see the impact, the rock spike crashed into his side, hurling him away. The sound of screaming in pain brought a small smile to his face, accompanied by a shower of rocks. Still, the match hadn't been called. Landing on his feet, his eyes found Max. The man was missing a third of his rock cover. Embedded in his torso was the silver mace, with blood leaking all around it. Kai ran at the vacant-eyed student, his gravity pillar already in place and his fists tight around his sword. Right as he was about to swing, an adult appeared in front of him, catching his blade above them in his hands effortlessly. Beyond the instructor, Max dropped to his knees as if submitting to his gravity. The stone skin began falling off of him as if he was shedding. A medic was already next to him, her hands alight with a white glow. Winner, Kaismo Cineris. The audience cheered, going wild for the incredible fight they had witnessed. Although it had only lasted 4 minutes, it had been intensive. Kai breathed a sigh of relief. He had done it. The match had been a back and forth between the two taking control until Kai had achieved victory with an unexpected move. Although his health had been so high, he felt the match had been a lot closer than how it had ended. If his armor wasn't lightened by the effects of the enchantments, he might not have been able to dodge those stone spikes, resulting in his loss. Health 1061-1, 1150. Stamina 6411, 900. Mana 439, 900. Walking back into the student waiting area, someone started clapping, followed by another, until most of the students were clapping. He didn't know what to do, so he mumbled his thanks shyly. "You did it!" Nicholas ran up to him when the clapping stopped and slapped his shoulder with a resounding ping. "Yay, I managed somehow," Kai said in a low voice. Everyone was still staring at him, and he wasn't a fan of the attention. "Managed? You controlled him. I've never seen Max afraid to go toe-to-toe with someone before. He had to change his fighting style completely, putting him on the back foot. And he was an entire realm above you. It was unbelievable. Thank you. Now can I get a minor health potion, please?" Kai asked Nicholas, trying to change the subject. He had given Nicholas a few potions to hold on to and his mace during the tournament. Since Kai didn't have a ring of storage, that didn't mean he wasn't above using his friends. Downing the minor health potion, he felt the small cuts healing where the rock fragments had sliced into him as they flew by. The announcer kept calling names to continue the fights. Kai breathed a sigh of relief since he had made it into the top 16. Without warning, someone started clapping behind him. "Bravo!" He heard a familiar voice that sent chills down his spine. Turning to the source, his expectations turned into reality. Garen, his reclusive older brother, was standing there giving him a slow clap with a wicked grin. "It's been a while, little brother.